Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 140 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, joined as always by the co-host Matt Feuerstein. Matt, it is another Tuesday night record for us. Everything is up, is down, down is up. I almost went crazy, Matt. Normally, I have a water with me when we record the podcast. I almost went with a Diet Coke. I had a couple sips. It didn't feel right. I went back to the water. So some things just can't change.
You could try some of that new diet water. You know, in America, our water is about to change, I think. So I think it's going to get I think they're going to call it a bad water is what we're going to get now. So good luck to us. And I hope you enjoy your fluoride and your teeth in Canada, because soon we won't have any.
Well, since we're Canada, soon we won't have any either. Because I'm joining you, buddy. I'm moving there.
Oh yeah. Well, it's I won't be involved in the hostile takeover, so don't blame me.
You might be no matter what. Because to paraphrase Chris Rock, Matt, I love Matt Feuerstein, but if the revolution ever comes, I'm gonna kill you first, just to show these Americans I mean business.
Well, I will allow you to kill me. I think I think of all the people that could kill me, you're the one that I want to have it done to me. And I think in honor of your home country of Canada, I think that's a great reason for me to go. So I'll do it. I'm going to sacrifice myself for the Canadian people.
Matt, I could never harm a hair on your beautiful head, and we are the real Can-Am connection. We are keeping these two countries' friendship going by that single hair on your beautiful head. It is just that is how tenuous this is. That's the responsibility we've taken on. We do it through a podcast that covers an independent wrestling federation from like 20 years ago.
I think I'm too old to be drafted into the war that we're going to wage on Canada, which is good.
That war won't last long if it happens.
Which is good for me because I don't want to invade Canada. But I feel like if the way these online edgelords that or Elon Musk is having run the country now, they're going to just like, if they hear me say that on a podcast, they're going to draft me just out of spite. So they'll be like, yeah, get in there, old man. You have to fight. So in that case, Trevor, I want you to kill me.
A war
for
isn't going to happen.
For Canada.
I'm just saying, a war is going to happen. If a war does happen, it'll be over in a couple of days, and I won't be killing you, one, because you're my friend, but two, because I'll be busy cravenly begging and denying I've ever said anything negative about anyone in power. I'll be telling Prime Minister Scott Baio how great a job I think he's doing.
Governor Scott Baio, if the country is annexed.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. See, there's so much, Matt, I'm going to have to get used to. But you know what? If it means I get access to more of your delightful fast food, more of that – well, actually, I was going to say more of that great American TV. That was something I lusted for as a kid. But nowadays, like, that's not a big deal. Like, that is one thing as a Canadian. You don't know the horror, Matt, of, like, growing up seeing ads for shows and channels you don't get. Like, you would get, like, 60% of them, but not all of them. So, like – I would see some Nickelodeon shows, but we wouldn't have Nickelodeon. But like the internet has erased that. Now you can watch whatever you want, whenever you want to watch it. But
listen to this. Listen to Trevor Dame begging co-presidents Trump and Musk to invade his country and annex them violently. What a traitor you are.
Look, I'm just gonna say I love Arby's. We have one in my city. We if you want to bring us a second, I can maybe help sabotage some things around here. I'm just saying.
Doughboys tells me that A&W Canada is like the best fast food place there is. So I don't know.
A&W Canada is pretty good. It's like higher quality ingredients, but like it's also incredibly expensive. So I don't eat that very often, and also got to be healthy. But
plus AEW Canada is like, it's so obsessed with people giving their burgers 5 stars that it's like they all, the fast food business is about making money, you burger marks.
I love that is very topical to anyone that has like been following social media the last 2 days online in relate to wrestling. But like, if anyone listens in within a month, they won't know that. Like, they'll go, why is he emphasizing that?
I
But
feel like this is slightly evergreen, at least over the past few
yes,
years.
yeah.
Which is it's kind of funny because like we do a podcast about 2000s Ring of Honor, which is more than I think any wrestling promotion in history, the one that courts star ratings, right?
Hmm.
Like that's like the
Yeah.
one. So it's like this discourse it just makes me roll my eyes so much. It's like, dude, you don't even know.
Yeah. But so yeah, we have a big show. I guess we should quit the fun and get to the serious work, Matt. But as always,
This podcast is the serious part of this podcast is not fun, and all of our listeners definitely understand that. Anyway, get to it. Get to
it is not the thing our listeners right now desperately want us to get to. Definitely not. But so as always, we cover what happened between the last show in the Ring of Honor timeline and the show we're covering tonight. I only have 2 news bits for the news section, but they're both meaty, Matt. There's some meat on the bones. The first one is from the Wrestling Observer newsletter's TNA section at the time. It is one of those long stories that I find interesting. That the first half you'll go, this has nothing to do with Ring of Honor, and then it will all be revealed, Matt. So this is a nice little snapshot of the time. So from the Wrestling Observer TNA section of an issue at this time, Dave wrote, "It is virtually a sure thing that TNA will be replacing the NWA name on its championship belts, with them being renamed the TNA World Heavyweight Championship belts. TNA had the rights to use the NWA name for its belts and control the championship for many years, but the NWA itself called them on a contract breach. 2 things in the contract were that TNA was supposed to feature the NWA name and plug NWA house shows. In the weekly Nashville days, TNA used to run a crawl with all the TNA house shows, but since getting real television, they stopped doing it. The NWA never made an issue out of it. The deal also was done before TNA was planning on doing house shows. In the deal, if TNA was going to run any house shows in territories where there is an existing NWA member, they would have to pay a territorial fee to that member. The dollar amount was insignificant, but TNA wasn't wanting to pay it. Since they didn't, it was another breach. The NWA itself wanted control of both the heavyweight and tag team titles, as they are trying to produce a TV show, but largely promote shows using top workers and copying the ROH formula of presenting great matches and trying to make money selling DVDs of the shows. As things currently stand, Jeff Jarrett has until the TV taping after the May pay-per-view to do whatever it is he's going to do to make the title transition. The NWA May office will be controlled by Charlotte attorney Bob Trohich, who was actually the NWA attorney dating back to the Crockett days. The plan is to do an 8-man tournament for the championship, with first-round matches taking place on various small NWA shows and having a big show with the semifinals and finals. They also plan 1 match to determine the NWA tag team champions. As things stand, the most likely NWA champion will be Bryan Danielson. Because Danielson works with Pro Wrestling Noah, there will be an attempt to have Noah recognize the title, but that's tricky because New Japan holds NWA membership. However, the New Japan promoter, who is the member, is Simon Inoki, who will be out of New Japan by this time. Nobody from the NWA has talked with Gabe Sapolsky as of yet, but they would want Danielson to defend the title on ROH shows. The question would be whether Sapolsky would promote a championship that he will likely have little or no say regarding title changes. But the NWA title may mean something to the ROH audience, and if the ROH title is any indication, Danielson will make a tremendous old-style champion, at least when it comes to performing the matches. So, yeah, this does not happen. Bryan Danielson gets hurt before the tournament. Adam Pearce ends up winning the NWA title, and Danielson never gets it. And ROH does end up doing a little bit of NWA things. I believe Adam Pearce and Brent Albright trade the title back and forth in late 2008 in like the final months of Gabe Sapolsky's tenure as Booker. But yeah, NWA, it's weird because I imagine most of our listeners know what the NWA is, but I know we have some listeners in their early 20s, and it's kind of crazy to think that like the NWA used to be such a major part of wrestling, and where we're talking about it now, like I would say, and no offense to people involved in the NWA, I would say it's been like over 40 years since it's been like significantly relevant. Like once they had the split with WCW in the 90s. It was just like one loss after another for those guys with, I'm sure some bright occasional moments, but, whether it's Shane Douglas winning the title in a tournament and then throwing it down immediately and saying it's shit and saying the ECW title's all that matters, to this period where TNA initially cozies up with them, but now they've kind of outgrown the NWA, to Billy Corgan buying it, which may be the real low point. But I will say, even though the NWA did not at this point mean what it used to mean as like the most important wrestling title in the world, the wrestling geek in me does mourn that Bryan Danielson did not get to become part of like the lineage of that title.
Yeah, I mean that the reign that we just reviewed, the Bryan Danielson's ROH title reign from 2005-2006, is really, am I wrong, the last extended major title reign Bryan Danielson ever had. Obviously he held the WWE World title and the WWE title on a few occasions for a few months at a time. I think probably his next longest reign was when he was like the champion of the planet, which I think would have been like October and November of 2018 until March or April of 2019. And, that was really it. Like, it's crazy to think of that. Like, he had such a legendary title reign. He never got the chance to be that world champion that represented a promotion really ever again. Am I wrong about this?
Matt, if you don't know, I don't know, because my memory is awful. But honestly, I mean, I think you're right. I just, obviously injury had a little something to do with that, but yeah, I'm looking at some of his reigns, his first reign to John Cena, when he beat John Cena at SummerSlam, he held that for minutes.
Right. And also he held the world title, which he won like at Money in the Bank. He won off of the Money in the Bank, I think in late 2011, and he lost that in like 8 seconds to Sheamus at WrestleMania 28, I think. And that was like, and then I don't think ever won that particular title back again. So yeah, I think you're right. Like that. Yeah. Right. The title he won at WrestleMania 30, he had to drop within less than 2 months because
it was like a month and a half. I'm looking up on Wikipedia now. Yeah. His, Defender of the World, whatever that was. Yeah. It was November 13th. Wikipedia says it lasted 145 days.
Yeah, so I think that was his next longest major title reign. I mean, I know he was PWG champion at points, but I don't even think that was a long reign, right? Like I think those were short reigns too, right? And also they didn't.
The Money in the Bank cash-in reign was 105 days. So that's another short one. I'll just look up PWG quick. But Matt, I think we can put this one to bed. I don't think he held titles for very long, unfortunately, for our dear friend that we've never talked to. But
well,
everyone's favorite part of podcasts.
Point being, like that NWA title reign would have given him a second chance to carry the banner of a promotion, and who knows what that would have been like. Would he have gotten more attention on that NWA title? I mean, listen, as good as guys like Adam Pearce and Brent Albright were, and they were certainly like good wrestlers in their right, like they weren't the sort of people that the whole world was talking about, like, oh, you got to watch their matches, Whereas Bryan Danielson he was one of the few people in the world that you could say that about, right? Like, you got to go out of your way to watch Bryan Danielson matches, and would have changed maybe something a little bit, or maybe not. Maybe it would have just been like the NWA was what it was by that point. Who knows?
Yeah, and if Dave's right that NWA was at this point trying to attempt going an ROH let's sell DVDs model. No offense to Adam Pearce, who I think someone I've actually liked more than my recollection rewatching his stuff for this podcast, but he was not going to be a DVD selling champion. He just didn't have those kind of matches, where you're going to spend $20 and since I also looked, Danielson's PWG, his big reign there was 160 days. So yeah, no super duper long reign. I mean, that's a decent reign, but
they weren't like ridiculously short, all of them, but they were never like, oh, this is defining an era of this promotion the way it was with the ROH title reign.
He was never, I mean, again, I think we talked about at the end of Danielson's ROH title reign, we read that quote from his book where he was like, Gabe Sapolsky was like the first guy to ever really like give me the ball and push me like the man. And I think we talked about that time. I don't think anyone else for various reasons and circumstances, I don't think to this day anyone else ever kind of did the way Gabe did in that run. And but let's get maybe a little bit more levity then for our other news story, because this is just a goofy bit of fun. One of my favorite things on this podcast is occasionally when we can good-naturedly just nudge Wade Keller in the ribs a bit. Good guy, done some good work, but sometimes he says goofy stuff. He doesn't do anything crazy here. I just thought this was more interesting. But selling the PW Torch, I don't know if they still do this, but I think we've referenced it on the pod before. They would do for at least some time a PW Torch draft where they would ask their readers to do an online vote of like, who would you draft if you were starting a pro wrestling promotion from scratch. So they did their annual draft, and Wade wrote about it here. So, and then I'm going to give out the ROH wrestlers that made the list, and then some comments that Wade wrote. So Wade wrote about the list. Just as a reminder, the annual PW Torch draft is a list compiled from votes from PW Torch readers in January. Readers were asked to base their top 10 draft picks on the 10 wrestlers they would like to build a wrestling promotion around if they somehow had their pick of all active wrestlers in the world. The goal of the promotion should be to make a profit, not suit their specific tastes as a fan. The PW Torch draft results serve as an indication each year of which wrestlers some of the most well-informed, closest followers of pro wrestling think are most worth pushing. It reveals who is perceived as underutilized, overpushed, or past their prime. So, the one that was the number one pick in 2007 at the start of the year was Samoa Joe. I'll read the top 5 and then I'll just say the rest because there's 50 here. The rest I'll just say is the ROH guys. But to give you some flavor of what the scene, at least this corner of the scene, what people felt about the wrestlers at the time. 1 was Joe, 2 was Edge, 3 was Shawn Michaels, 4 was AJ Styles, 5 was John Cena. 6 was CM Punk, 8 was Bryan Danielson, 9 was Homicide, 19 was Christopher Daniels, 21 was Mark and Jay Briscoe as a team, 22 was Senshi, a.k.a. Low Key, 27 Austin Aries, 28 Alex Shelley, which I thought was funny, like poor Alex Shelley, he's always right behind Austin Aries, even in this list. 29 was Nigel McGuinness, 31 was Kenta, 38 Colt Cabana, 40 Davey Richards, 43 Roderick Strong, 45 Chris Hero, and 50 Jack Evans. So, quite a bit of ROH representation there.
The most surprising thing to me, like in hindsight, I guess putting myself back in the mindset of people in 2007, it kind of isn't so surprising, but it still kind of is to me that John Cena was 5. Like, yeah. I feel like he probably would have been my number 1. I don't know if I would have said that then. I might have, though. I mean,
certainly with the benefit of hindsight, I think you have to say, the right quote unquote right pick.
Yeah, John Cena. I mean, I think probably the first half of 2007 is when Cena started getting a lot more positive criticism from our circles, if that makes sense, right? Like the matches.
I think after maybe the Umaga feud, do you think that was what started the ball rolling?
Yeah, and I think he just had a lot of good matches. I mean, Umaga, and then I thought his matches with Shawn Michaels were really good. And then also he carried the Great Khali to maybe the Great Khali's best match. People forget about that. He was just good. I mean, he had good matches before that. I remember the I Quit match he had with JBL in 2005. But yeah, I think in 2006 people were really getting in on the racking on Cena bit. And it really took 2007 for some people, not even everyone, but some people to start seeing oh, actually John Cena has really good matches a lot. And he's not just when he's carried by people. I think in hindsight, it sounds silly to think of 2007 Shawn Michaels being drafted ahead of John Cena.
Yeah.
Even though I think think Shawn Michaels in that era is, if anything, a little bit underrated by certain people at this point. But but still, compared to John Cena, Edge too, honestly. I don't remember Edge having as many great matches as Cena did. And obviously he wasn't as big of a draw. So I don't know. It's just interesting. Obviously, I mean, 5 is not bad, but Cena was the top guy. What do you think of the idea of Samoa Joe being number one in that at that point?
I think, he probably had the advantage where he had the real hardcore base for a couple of years from Ring of Honor and the Indies, but now this was the point where he was getting pushed in TNA. So he kind of had now like the ultra hardcore fans and now the fans of wrestling of like the biggest company in the US that isn't WWE. I think Joe certainly, I think that's a huge what if for pro wrestling. If Joe had been pushed, if signed by WWE and given like a hard push at this time, I think, I'm very bullish on Joe. I think the sky would have been the limit for him. But I going to your point, I would say too is, the way Wade framed this, which was, it's not about what you personally like, it's about like your goal in this list should be drafting a promotion to make money. Well, then, yeah, I think you kind of touched on this. Age should factor in, and Shawn Michaels is 12 years older than John Cena, I believe.
Although still much younger than a lot of WWE and AEW's biggest stars today.
Yeah, exactly. But even at that point, even if, let's say in terms of value to promotion, I had like Shawn at a 10 and Cena at an 8, I might still pick, and I don't think I would have at this point, but like even if I did, I think you got to pick the guys that you conceivably will have 12 extra years with. If you're just basing this pure on, I want to make money.
For sure.
It's just simple logic, But then we get to the fun part, Matt, of course, which is Wade Keller's thoughts on the list. I edited this, so it was just his thoughts on the ROH wrestler, since we're an ROH podcast. Wade wrote, Bryan Danielson and Homicide made the biggest jumps of anyone in this year's top 10. Danielson went from 37 last year to number 8 this year and had a stellar in-ring year in Ring of Honor. Homicide went from 42 last year to number 9 this year and was seen by more fans than ever due to exposure in LAX. Although Matt, let's see if you can find what I thought was funny about this. This is Wade. Although ROH fans will speak up and say TNA has only touched on Homicide's potential in the ring and on the mic.
Well, your speaking emphasis made it very easy for me to guess what you found funny about this.
I mean, look, I'm a big fan of Homicide. I think he's underrated. He just announced, I don't know if you caught this, Matt, that he said this would be his last year in wrestling.
Yeah, and a lot of people have been fantasy booking some big moments for him this year already. I hope he gets at least some of them.
But as someone who has rewatched almost all of Homicide's first run in Ring of Honor, I can tell you why I like him is not his mic work in the least.
Yeah, okay, so it's like this. I think what someone might say is like Homicide does not cut good promos, but he projects a good aura on his promos in that he can sort of seem a little bit unhinged or dangerous when he's talking. Like sometimes you hear him speaking like on promos and it's like, oh my God, this guy might be like really like wanting to fuck people up, even though I don't totally get what point he's making. So I think maybe you could make that argument. I don't know if that's the argument Wade Keller would have made, but I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put, like, what I would say is Homicide, like, if he can cut a 60-second promo, in that 60 seconds, he can give you a good, like, he could really get across, like, who he is kind of in a way, like you just get a good feel for his vibe. But like, he is not a guy that would ever, I would say, like, be able to cut out like a 2-minute promo that would like talk you into a building, quote unquote,
Yeah. Or like the way they were doing promos, especially, I mean, they still do it obviously, but like really a lot back in the 2000s, which was just like 20 minutes in the ring. You know what I mean? Like, in front of a live crowd, doing a whole thing like that was never Homicide.
And then we go to more Wade thoughts. Wade continues, among the top 20 finishes, I'd say that CM Punk is too high based on what I've seen of him lately, although that's no dig at him because I think he's very talented. I just wouldn't have him in a top 10 position. It helps that he had a chance to really shine in ROH in some great matches against top-level talents, something Shelton Benjamin, just to grab a name, and any number of other talented yet unknown indie wrestlers haven't had the luxury of. I'd have Shelton Benjamin higher based on the type of more realistic, athletic-based promotion I think would have the best chance to make money in America today. And, it's easy to point and laugh at Wade at this now, but like CM Punk was definitely a you got it or you didn't guy for quite a long time.
I mean, I guess you could say like hindsight's 2020, but like You think we would have said CM Punk was too low, too high at that point? You know,
No.
like you or me? Like I
No, but
think
we got it. Like I like Punk basically from the first time, from the first few appearances I saw him in the Indies. But yeah, like I would have been high. I would have said a top 10 position for Punk is fitting. But he was a guy where a lot of people resisted him for both outside of wrestling and within the companies he worked for,
well,
especially
but like
WWE.
to me that's the thing. Like you're getting snowed by WWE propaganda if that's what your assessment of CM Punk was in 2007. Like that's how I feel about it. Like Wade Keller saw Punk in ROH. He saw him live in ROH. He knows. He was not oblivious to the idea to see how talented CM Punk was. Like WWE had an idea for him and they slotted him in a certain spot and they resented him and like it took them years to finally realize what they had in him, but like that's them. That's WWE. Like that's Vince McMahon being an idiot. You know, like that's not.
Yeah.
Like I feel like someone like Wade Keller should have known better in 2007. Like if he was starting a company, anybody who saw CM Punk do a promo before he went to WWE at that point should have known that that guy had major upside, and there was a reason why he was getting over greater than his push in WWE at that point too. You know, like it's just
Yeah.
I don't know. I think this is a little bit more than hindsight being 2020. I think this is Wade Keller buying into the WWE bullshit, if that makes sense.
I will say, he says, I picked Shelton Benjamin because of the realistic athletic-based promotion I think would have the best chance to draw money in America today. I like Shelton Benjamin. I think he's a good wrestler. I think this AEW run has been like a real, like, second showing of him, when people thought maybe he was kind of, just going to be what he is. He kind of remind people why he had so much potential early on in his career. But I will say, like, if what you value as athleticism, you could not have probably a more bigger gap on that one aspect of wrestling, which I do not think is everything, than Shelton Benjamin and CM Punk. Because Shelton Benjamin, beautiful, incredible, natural athlete, makes things look fluid and just one of those guys who looks like he makes it look easy. CM Punk, I think he's a better wrestler when you factor in everything, but the opposite of making it look easy. When you watch CM Punk, I think it's part of his charm. It looks hard, He looks like a guy who he is working really hard to pull the stuff off. He is not a guy that makes it look effortless. And if I guess surprisingly, I'm now being more sympathetic to Wade. I would just say if that's what you're valuing, then yeah, there is. But wrestling is a lot more than athleticism.
Listen, if someone in 2007 wanted to put like Benjamin slightly higher than Punk, I would disagree, but I wouldn't think it was crazy. It's more just like the idea that like Punk at number 9 is too high. Like I feel like that's more what I objected to.
Well, also him saying that, like, well, Punk, he kind of intimated that, like, Punk's this high because he got great opportunities to look good in the Indies on Ring of Honor with all these great opponents. Well, like, he stood out even on the Indies, where they were all wrestling each other in the same circle of people. It wasn't like, oh, Punk looks better, because of this magical indie opportunity. He stood out even on the Indies as one of the top guys. So, anyway, enough of that. Let's finally get to the show we're covering today, and it's a big one. All Star Extravaganza III took place March 30th, 2007 at the Michigan State Fairgrounds and Expo Center in Detroit, Michigan, in front of a reported crowd of 1,200 fans. This was, of course, Ring of Honor continuing the WrestleMania weekend tradition. Mania was Sunday, back when it was only those bygone days, not when it was a one-night affair. This was the Friday night show. And Dave Meltzer writes in The Observer, quote, both nights that Ring of Honor ran, Friday and then the next night, Saturday, drew 1,200 fans each, which filled the building, but they were disappointed that with so many fans coming in for the big show that they didn't do better. Merchandise sales were nothing out of the ordinary either. So I'll say, Matt, when I read this, I looked up, I just wanted to make sure, like, what are they referring to? So for comparison's sake, the year before when WWE had WrestleMania in Chicago, ROH ran that rare, maybe the only time they've done the triple shot. They ran the show Thursday in Detroit, and that show drew 550. And then they ran Friday in Chicago. That drew 1,200, just like tonight. And then they ran Saturday in Chicago, and that drew 1,700. So I would imagine ROH's disappointment would be they were hoping they would just draw 1,700 again, because otherwise, like, this is a Friday night show. They drew the same here Friday night in Detroit that they drew the Friday night in Chicago. It's just that the next night they don't get that 500 extra ticket bump.
Yeah,
They would do better next year in Florida.
yeah. Well, I think it's clearly a you blame Trump. Trump drew the WrestleMania crowd, so they're not Trump fans. They want something big and golden and beautiful, and not something indie like Ring of Honor. And I'm just kidding, but that's an excuse they could make.
So we opened the DVD with Bruno Sammartino signing autographs before the show. The camera pans and we see interviewer Rebecca Bayless standing with the line, and she tells us that tonight ROH has fans attending from over 30 states and 20 countries. She asks a few fans where they've come from. We see fans saying they're from Israel, New Jersey, Toronto, Charleston, Connecticut, New York State, and Michigan. Bayless says fans seem to think Ring of Honor is worth traveling to from all over the world to see. And I thought that was a little bit funny because they never once mention it's WrestleMania weekend. So I felt that slightly disingenuous. Like technically, yes, they still decide they also wanted to see Ring of Honor while they were there that weekend. But I have a feeling not everyone is making the trip.
But okay, so a few things. One, those were like all like very recognizable ROH fans. So like they probably did all make the trip, but they're just like the handful of people that do that anyway, you know?
Yeah.
But also like I think there was a little bit of like tongue in cheekness and winking to that bit. Like I think there was a little bit of self-awareness there too.
I also think it's kind of a sign of the times, right? Where like nowadays it's just a given that people going to shows WrestleMania weekend will be from all over the place. That WrestleMania is like a destination week vacation for a lot of people around the world. Where back at this point, it was still kind of a novelty of, wow, like this many people are coming from this many places to watch wrestling on a weekend. And
yeah, well, this
we
was
were
also
just kind of starting that.
Yeah, I mean, they had WrestleManias in stadiums in 2001, 2, and 3, but then they had them back at arenas in 2005 and 6, and this is like the beginning of the current run that they're still on, which is they only have WrestleManias in stadiums where there's like 60,000 people or more coming to these shows from all over the world. And, you know, like 2006, Ring of Honor pretty much started the tradition of WrestleMania weekend, I guess you could say like piggyback shows. And, you know, I think it grew in 2007. It just got really bigger after that until probably COVID, I guess, is probably when it kind of shrunk again. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, yeah, it's fun to watch this as like an artifact. It's kind of like the beginning of an era in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm. And then we get a brief video package hyping the stars of Dragon Gate, showing their prior ROH involvement, and then letting us know they are back for this weekend. We get highlights of each of the wrestlers, complete with captions for their names and their stable affiliations in Japan, which I thought was kind of cool. There's a dark match that we did not get to see on the DVD because it was a dark match. Dingo! And that's a blast from the past. And Mitch Franklin defeated Bobby Dempsey and Rhett Titus. And that brings us to the official opener that we did see on the DVD, a four-corner survival match. Adam Pearce scored to the ring by Shane Hagedorn, defeated Chris Hero, who was scored to the ring by Larry Sweeney and Tank Toland, Colt Cabana, and Matt Sydal in 11 minutes, 16 seconds when Pearce pinned Cabana after hitting him with the brass knuckles. Matt, what did you think about this as an opener to get a big show off the ground?
It's funny because, like, this match had a lot of good crowd reactions. I think that this whole show had good crowd reactions. But I'm not sure that I would have wanted some of these guys to just be in a comedy match. Like Matt Sydal, I feel like has been a guy who's been featured a lot over the past, I don't know, year, but like especially the previous 6 months. And he could have really put on a show this weekend, and they just kind of made him a part of a comedy match. Obviously, the comedy character is what Hero was doing at this point for the most part in ROH. And, we've talked about Sapolsky expressing frustration with that years later. In hindsight, I kind of feel frustrated with that too, because I know how amazing Chris Hero is. And obviously he was very entertaining and overdoing his goofy antics and his athletic movements that accomplish nothing. And, the crowd chants, that was awesome to it and stuff. But looking back, I'm like, man, I wish that Chris Hero was somebody that would contribute to lots of great matches in ROH during this era. And he really didn't, because this is what he decided was what ROH needed at the time. He did a good job at it, but I don't know. I sort of lament what could have been a little bit. But, so while I think it was a waste of some of the best um, wrestlers on the roster in what was mostly a comedy match that didn't have much intensity or stakes, it definitely got over with the crowd. It definitely accomplished its goal. Everybody got to be a little bit wacky. This was the first time that Seidel didn't have any gold with him for in a while. I guess had he lost the Dragon Gate title that he held?
I think
by this
so.
point?
Yeah, I think I know that he defended it against Aries, and I think that was his only successful defense. So yeah, I think whatever he probably already did have his next Dragon Gate tour, he lost it right back.
Gotcha. Yeah, and although he's been a heel and like sort of was a little bit heelish here, but like he's still sort of in the babyface role because Pierce was working him over again, and Seidel would get the best of him with athleticism. Although there was a spot where Pierce came back and basically chokeslammed him like through the mat. It was pretty intense. That was one of I think the most heavy duty moves of the match. There was also a cool spot during Seidel's comeback where he leaps off the ropes, springing off the back of Pierce, who's hunched over, into a swinging DDT on Hero. I thought that was a pretty cool move, which allowed Cabana to get a hot tag after Seidel had been worked over by Hero and Pierce for a while. And then I think another spot I liked, which is for some reason, Cabana hits a top rope Rana on Pierce, but before he hits it, he yells, "Yowza!" Which, more yowzas in my wrestling. But yeah, I thought it's not like it was bad. It's not like it wasn't entertaining, but in some ways it felt a little bit like a waste to me.
I think I like this a little bit more than you, although I can understand your feeling of, this much talent in the match, and you're kind of getting – this is the kind of match I would call like pure candy, right? I think I've used that phrase before, where it's just very light entertainment. It's fun in the moment, but it's also very – it's not going to be memorable. It's not really going to stick with you. You're going to enjoy it in the moment, and, then it's going to dissolve from your memory like Marty McFly in a picture. I thought the first thing I noticed watching this match was how loud the crowd was. Like, this wasn't just a hot crowd. This was a large hot crowd. 1,200 is not unheard of for Ring of Honor, but it's on the high end. And in this building, they're showing the difference I think you get between like the sound of a loud 600 fans and that a little bit more of a roar you get from 1,200 loud fans compared to like, I think if people had just watched, as we record this a few days earlier, the Australia show for AEW, the sounds of like over 10,000 loud fans. Every time you kind of go make a jump up, you get like this different kind of sound, which I appreciated. There's a lot of fun. A lot of the fun early is about character work from Hero and Cabana, and the crowd goes nuts for both. Hero gets a "that was awesome" chant early for his excessive flips, and then Colt responds by he offers Hero his arm, then he breaks the arm wringer by sneezing in Hero's face, which was disgusting, and then he mocks his flips, gets a big crowd reaction of his own. And I get completely what you said, Matt, about like feeling like, how Hero later on will become more serious and how, maybe that was a missed opportunity for him in this era of Ring of Honor. But I also look at it kind of through the lens of Hero was kind of like a serious white meat babyface technical wrestler for a fair bit of time on the indies for years that ROH kind of passed him up. And I could see him kind of thinking, well, this is my way I'm going to get over here, because I'm not going to be Austin Aries. I'm going to – let's do Southern goofy heel ridiculousness. And it is getting really over in these buildings. So –
oh, yeah, and I just want to make clear, I'm not criticizing him for doing it at all. Like, at the time, like, I loved it, and, like, obviously the crowds were really into it. But in hindsight, it just like, I'm not saying he should have done anything different, but in hindsight, it's like, what could have been if he had just decided, I'm going to work to the best of my serious wrestler abilities on this roster. Like what he could have added to the company. I totally understand why he did it, and I don't even think he was wrong to do it. It's just sort of like, things aren't meant to be necessarily, wrestling isn't necessarily meant to be reviewed almost 20 years later, but
yeah,
alas, that's what we're doing. So I'm sort of seeing it through 2025 eyes.
Well, yeah, definitely. If you're just a fan of Chris Hero and want him to have the most successful career possible, I think he had a good career in terms of indie wrestling. Obviously, he didn't get the really extended big opportunities in a prominent major promotion, other than that brief bit as Cassius Ohno in NXT. But like, what I would say is, yeah, there is an opportunity where I can imagine, especially at the time we're about to get to, where a bunch of big names are going to have to leave in a few shows from Ring of Honor. If Hero in this era was not goofy flippy do Chris Hero, but let's say we could like snap our fingers and have him be that kind of peak athletic condition Chris Hero in just the trunks instead of the pleather pants, doing like the young knockout kid elbow gimmick. I think not only would have Gabe pushed him to the top, I think Gabe would have like came in his pants. So yeah, so definitely this gimmick and this comedy at this time, it was good enough to kind of ensure Hero was going to be like a valued member of the mid card. But yeah, it is the kind of gimmick that you probably can't see Gabe pushing very often into the main event. Certainly not giving a world title to a guy who does endless kip ups and then can't kip up anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think of Chris Hero as one of the greatest wrestlers of the 21st century. You know what I mean? And I don't know if you would get that impression watching him in 2007 Ring of Honor.
Well, I remember, like, again, we've talked about this in the past. Some people did not get that Chris Hero was kind of, I think, playing up the gimmick of like people, when I used to do more of the technical stuff, that people thought I was too dry and too boring. So, and that I couldn't get into Ring of Honor for all these years. So the whole gimmick was I'm doing these needless flips. I'm going over the top to be like, oh, is this what you guys wanted? Like, I'm kind of sarcastically replying to the fans. I remember like back when Brian Alvarez reviewed these matches, like he reviewed Ring of Honor for a time on like the Brian and Vinny show on Figure 4 online, like he did not get that at all. He took that, and so that's the other thing. If you take this literally, you just see a guy doing things less smoothly than other people, going, why does this guy think he's so special? Like if you and I can both think, well, maybe you're a bit dense if you don't get it, but I think some people were that dense, and did not get.
Yeah,
it was kind of like a meta joke on everything.
Not just Alvarez, Meltzer too.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you're a person that's just dropping in on Ring of Honor, like occasionally. If you're not like watching and keeping up with the indie scene in general, you don't get the context for years that kind of led to him doing this, right? So anyway, with the match, yeah, you have like four guys with charisma. They break out fun spots. You got a crowd I thought was really eating up every bit of it. You mentioned the chokeslam Adam Pearce did, and between this one and the one he recently did, we saw him do to Delirious. I feel like Adam Pearce is one of the most underrated chokeslams in all of wrestling. Like, especially for a guy like normally you associate chokeslams with really tall guys. For just like an average height guy.
Well, he was tall. He was tall for Ring of Honor.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you got a good point. But so Pearce, even again, to give you like the vibe of this match, there were some fun spots, and Matt called them out. But yeah, there was also some comedy. Like this is a match where Pearce does a stinger splash, complete with a pre-splash woo. Hero breaks out the atomic drop, which he's been doing recently, which I love. I will continue to say more wrestlers need to do an atomic drop, and yeah, he also has this great sequence late where he takes a standing Colt down with this flying stomp just to his chest as Colt is standing, and then he immediately follows up and just hits a big running big boot to Seidel, which I thought was an awesome little sequence there. To me, this is a low good. You didn't burn anyone out the crowd, but everyone did at least one move that I thought was flashy and eye grabbing. You did do some comedy and character work, but you also made sure to fit in a bunch of action. But again, it's a match you will enjoy in the moment. You won't remember it very long afterwards, but at the same time, I get your thought of, on a big show like this, maybe you'd want to see more from Seidel, more from Hero, more from Cabana than being put in bigger spots. And I also don't think that every match needs to be super. Some matches can be empty and disposable and enjoyable in the moment, and I was okay with that for this one. But few notes from the match I just want to point out quickly. The robot arm is gone with the names of each wrestler during their entrance, was presented by this animation of a mechanical robot arm. Now it's a bolt of electricity rather than a mechanical arm. And I believe this was another thing that Gabe on the Newswires did just like the robot arm where, he hyped it up knowing that it would disappoint people because he did, remember when he did like the robot arms and people didn't know, and it turned out just to be a new way to display the names on the graphics. And I think he did the same with like the electricity. Like I think he wrote something like, Ring of Honor's gonna get like a jolt of electricity coming or something like that.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, a little stinker. But I also like that. Did you notice that during the entrances, after Matt Seidel's entrance, Adam Pearce was already in the ring, and he just says an aside to the camera, just very earnestly, he goes, "He has the worst fucking music ever, by the way. His music is terrible." And you could tell that was his real emotions, and I thought that was enjoyable.
Well, I mean, lyrically, it doesn't really fit wrestling, but I still like that theme song. The song is called Clavicle, and it's by the Alkaline Trio, I believe, in case anyone wants to listen to it.
Did you also notice that Lenny Leonard said that 40 different fans from 40 different states were here tonight, which I think Rebecca Bayless only said 30, and also I just don't think that could be true. I don't think in 1,200 fans there was 40 different U.S. states represented. I just don't think so.
Yeah,
even if you include Canada.
Even if you include Canada, I was going to. Oh man, we made the same joke.
Damn. We're brothers. But also, one of the last thing I want to say about this match, which we probably spent too much time on, I thought Tank Toland was great as a second here. He was so intense on the floor, like he was kind of taking after Larry Sweeney, which we'll talk about later, where he was just working. He was burning calories on the floor. He might not have been really involved in the match. He was emoting, so he was earning whatever he got paid here. That brings us to a do or die match, the classic Ring of Honor kind of trial to see, hey, should someone prove themselves and get a job in the company? Eric Stevens defeated a Ring of Honor student, Alex Payne, via pinfall in 21 seconds after he hit a doctor bomb. So, yeah, this is Eric Stevens' ROH debut. He had been in FIP for a while before then, and this match lasts a whole 3 moves. There's a pop-up into a slam, his big running choo-choo avalanche in the corner that'll become a signature for him, and the doctor bomb. And poor Alex Payne did not even get an entrance. It got cut out of the DVD. So not only does he get squashed, he doesn't even get an entrance.
I almost wonder if they knew that in advance, like they were just like, yeah, we're going to make this like the squashiest of squash matches. And of course, in your traditional, at least WWF style squash matches from the Saturday morning shows back in the day, the jobbers were already in the ring. So it's just like, we are going to give this all of the trappings of a squash. The jobber will be in the ring. The star will come out. They will dominate. They will impress with moves, and that will be that. And that is exactly what happened. Certainly not much to talk about match-wise, but the offense looked good. Alex Payne took it well, and it's cool that they decided they were going to bring someone in and just like, we're going to push this person. We're going to push Eric Stevens, and we're going to try to get him over right away as being someone with dominant offense, and obviously he's going to eventually join the Resilience, as it soon will be called.
And I also think it was cool, although maybe it was not financially smart for Ring of Honor, but, a lot of indies, they book a limited number of guys, and it's like, if we're booking someone, they better work full matches for us. We got to get full value out of this. We're running on a shoestring budget. And there is something kind of nice that Ring of Honor would still give you things like this, where Eric Stevens is getting brought in this weekend, coming to do these shows, and he is just going to do squash matches on these 2 nights. This is just a very, like you said, like a traditional, like old school wrestling introduction for him. There's not this idea of, we booked you, so we got to get full value from you right away. It's like, no, we're just going to have you squash a couple students.
He's going to be established, so that when they do want to get more out of him in a match, like, he is established and over. And it seems like a no-brainer to me.
We then go to the Briscoes outside somewhere in a blue, non-color corrected world. They're excitedly mumbling to each other about the match they had against each other on the last show. Mark says tonight they're going to regain the tag titles from Shingo and Naruki Doi. Jay lays out then an open challenge to any tag team in the world. Mark says 2007 will be the year of the Briscoe. And I went back just to make sure. I think he said Briscoe, not Briscoes, which I liked. And then I believe the video may have gone into slow motion for Mark doing his front toothless smile. which I thought was amazing.
That's happened once
I
before.
love how much Ring of Honor clearly loves that Mark Briscoe no longer has his front teeth.
Yeah, they did that once before with the toothless slow-mo.
Yeah.
It's creepy, but it works. Which is hopefully what someday somebody will say about me. So
I was about to say that should be my slogan. It's creepy, but it works. Do you guys have Buckley's cough medicine in America?
If we do, I am not aware of it.
So there's a cough medicine in Canada with no flavoring, and it tastes awful. And they literally ran ads where the slogan was Buckley's. It tastes awful, but it works. So I feel like, we're looking for you and I would have the human equivalent. We're looking for the human equivalent of that catchphrase.
I'm gonna look up Buckley's cough medicine to see if the active ingredient is any different than the one in like the cough medicine that doesn't taste disgusting.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we're just going to say, and it is playing on that classic psychological thing of the idea that like, if something is less enjoyable, it has to be worth it somehow. Like our cough medicine has to be better because it tastes awful. You're paying through pain to get to the other side on this cold. But
all right, so Buckley's original mixture. I will say this: the active ingredients are different from what I see in other cough medicines. Each teaspoonful, 5 milliliters, contains 153 milligrams of ammonium carbonate, 267 milligrams of potassium bicarbonate, 22 milligrams of menthol, and 2.2 milligrams of camphor, which, it is different than most of the cough medicine you'd find in a drugstore in America, at least.
Well, Matt, let me tell you something. When we merge in a few months, treat yourself to some Buckley's one day during cold season.
Yeah.
It does work. Yeah,
I just had COVID for the first time, and I guess I could have used some of that.
Exactly. Not a moment too soon, unfortunately. The pain you could have been saved if things just went a little earlier. But our third match on the show, Masaki Mochizuki defeated Davey Richards via pinfall in 10 minutes, 40 seconds after hitting a roundhouse kick to the head. So this is Mochizuki's first match ever in Ring of Honor. He was never part of the Dragon Gate excursion, that they had last weekend. He wasn't even sent like Shingo and Shima were on prior shows prior to last year's WrestleMania weekend. And he'd only have 2 more matches in Ring of Honor after this, one of them the next night. It would not be, though, the last time these two guys wrestled each other, because they'd actually trade the FIP heavyweight title back and forth a couple of years later in Dragon Gate and Dragon Gate USA. So these guys would wrestle each other some more. This match was hyped as two guys who love kicking, and I do think it delivered in that regard. Well, actually, like in particular, I thought Mochizuki delivered on that. I thought he did a bunch of fun kick variations here. Davey, meanwhile, was in full hammy heel mode, and this match almost felt like Davey Richards versus the crowd and Mochizuki. He really gets into it with Green Lantern fan and friends who are really dumping on him from the front row. At one point, Davey bumps right almost on top of them in the front row. And then later on, he has this great line delivery where he's getting his ass kicked on the floor by Mochizuki. And as he walks by Green Lantern fan and his friends, one of them shouts how they don't like him anymore. And while Davey's walking away from Mochizuki, who's been putting a beating on him, Davey, he's just trying to escape this beating. Davey just keeps walking by, and he says very calmly in a very flat voice, something like, "I never liked you anyway." And he just keeps walking, and I just love that. I thought that, he did have some real, like, good, underrated comedy chops. For as much as I sometimes though like hammy heel Davey, this is a match where it feels like they're limiting their scope because it's the third match on the card, and that they would have more in them to do. They have it in them to do a lot more, especially Davey. Although that also kind of makes the match more focused. Like Mochizuki kicks Davey up to start. Davey dodges a kick on the floor, and Mochizuki ends up hitting one of the loudest "I hit the ring post" spots I've ever heard. And then Davey really slows down the match in the middle. He works over Mochizuki's leg, but he also talks to the crowd, I would say, just as much as he works over the leg during this. We can't hear a lot of it, but it sounds like the crowd's really getting a kick out of it. And maybe we should be glad we can't hear much of it, because from what I did hear, he did some Japanese slurs.
Yeah, several times used a particular racial slur. Which I think was probably not cool in 2007. Definitely not cool now.
Yeah, it might be cool again in a year or two with the way the political climate's going, unfortunately. But
yeah, well, I meant cool. I meant cool, not cool, not accepted by the mainstream, man. No, but seriously, yes, it is. That is a sad state. That yes, there are probably a lot of people, probably not people that listen to this podcast, but a lot of people out there who would listen to this and be like, Why are you snowflakes complaining about racial slurs? It's 2025. Haven't you heard that wokeness is over? But not here on Through the Years, right? We stay woke, right, Trevor?
Yeah. Yeah, if we're being a little political tonight, it's because we were just at this rally. We were, both of us, it's just what we do, at the docks. We're always at the rallies. But
if you listen to our first episode at the beginning, you know that this is what we do. So nobody really could be so shocked that we might get political sometimes.
I'm a little torn on this match, Matt. I would say I don't know if I want to give this like a high above average or a low good, like that border of 2 3/4 stars to 3 stars. I think your enjoyment on this match will depend on how much you like cool Mochizuki kicks and Davies' heel act, because you get a bunch of both. I feel like if you want to see some like, we're going to pull out all the stops to steal the show, this isn't it, which, it is a difference from like the UK shows we just watched, where it felt like every match was kind of, or most of the matches, regardless of where they were on the card, were kind of attempting to go 100%, let's do a show-stealing match. This was more of that, we're going to give you enough to be enjoyable, have a good, fun match, but, we're third on from the bottom. We're not going to go all the way out. We're not going to go crazy legs. We're not going to try and steal the show, even though it's a major show. There's arguments for and against that. It's a different philosophy of constructing cards. Overall, I enjoyed it, though. Again, nothing special, but I did enjoy it. And I thought Mochizuki looked pretty good.
Well, you said you were torn on if it's above average or good, and then you just said it was a good, fun match. So I think you answered your question right there. But I thought it was good. Like I probably liked it more than you. I definitely liked it more than you. I liked it more than the opener too. Other than the unfortunate slurs that Davey Richards used, I thought his taunting the crowd was fun. I liked a point late in the match where he gets a move hit on him. Eventually, he hits the dragon screw and gets the stretch muffler, and then Richards yells, "I'm winning," which tells everybody that he's actually not winning. I thought that, I liked the idea that they were matching each other kick for kick, so it gave the match a theme. Like you said, Mochizuki hit a lot of fun kicks. I thought like the alarm clock right into the seamless bridging German suplex for 2 was really good. I mean, Richards is still really athletically impressive at this point, and his offense looks really good a lot of the time. Even as he becomes a little bit more comedic as a heel. And I thought Mochizuki made a good impression of himself for the first time he'd appeared in ROH. And I thought it was just a nonstop fun match. So I thought it was good. I do think Richards needs to start winning some matches, but that's neither here nor there. I thought for what this was, it was enjoyable.
His really long, which I'll have to track again. I had that number before, but like his really long losing streak is going to come to an end soon. But I think he loses tomorrow night too. So it will continue at least for this weekend. We then go to Dave Prazak in the ring, who introduces Bruno Sammartino. Bruno gets a nice reaction. He gets a big Bruno chant. And Bruno gets in the ring gets the mic, and he says many years ago, even though he was 275 pounds back then, he could run to the ring and jump on the apron. But now, after several back surgeries and being a lot older, he can barely even make it up into the ring, let alone jump in it. And the crowd at that point then decides that's the point they should chant one more match for a 71-year-old man who just told them he's had multiple back surgeries and has a hard time now even getting inside a pro wrestling ring.
To be fair, Trevor, did you see Ric Flair's last match?
You know what? Bruno, at 71, probably could have had some kind of I'll say this: Bruno at 71 definitely still could have kicked my ass. I think that goes without saying.
I feel like Bruno can still kick my ass now, and he's dead.
You go to that grave and save the wrong thing, and his hand's going to jump up through the ground and grab you. So Bruno says he's really, really happy to be here. He says it's a free country, and those who enjoy what's out there in wrestling right now, it's their right. But those of us who don't like what's out there right now, it's our right as well. He talks about how he wasn't up to date on modern wrestling, but ROH sent him a DVD, and he watched them and was impressed. Bruno says it's great that another organization is coming up because it's not healthy when it's just one organization. Bruno puts over the ROH talent, and he says he thinks ROH is going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and that he'd love to see that. Bruno starts to wrap up his speech when Larry Sweeney, coming out of the curtain with Chris Hero and Tank Tolan beside him, interrupts. He introduces himself and says it's an honor to be in the same building as Bruno, the man who sold out Madison Square Garden 187 times. And I'll note, Matt, I believe that's why they call Bruno Sammartino the Notorious 187.
That was very good.
Larry keeps naming Bruno stats before entering the ring and introducing Tolan as their trainer and an all-natural athlete, playing up the joke that everyone assumes that Tank Tolan's doing steroids, and Chris Hero as the number one athlete, playing up on the joke that people other than Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez got, which is Chris Hero was not the number one athlete in pro wrestling. Sweeney continues as Tank Tolan does push-ups, and Hero works with resistance bands, which just always got a kick out of. Larry says the only reason Bruno was known as professional wrestling's living legend is that Chris Hero was born 50 years too late. The crowd then chants, "Shut the fuck up." Larry says now that Hero is under the tutelage of Tank Tolan, he is 10 times the athlete that Bruno was. Larry then says that Hero challenges Bruno to an arm wrestling match. Bruno starts laughing as the crowd chants, "Fuck him up, Bruno, fuck him up." Bruno calls Larry a comedian. Sweeney says maybe Bruno doesn't want the fans' last memory of him being his arm going down to Hero, so how about Hero just puts him down with a cravat instead? Bruno calls himself an old man, but then he calls Hero a punk. Larry and his gang close in on Bruno. When Nigel McGuinness runs to the ring, he takes out Hero, murders Tolan with a Rainmaker lariat, and holds Larry so Bruno can deck him with a punch, which he does. Bruno shakes Nigel's hand as Tolan and Hero carry Sweeney to the back. Nigel apologizes to Bruno, who is already on the apron, antsy to get out for those. But Nigel says, "I apologize for those wankers." Nigel says, if Hero wants to disrespect a legend like that, he's going to have to go through him. Nigel says, at ROH, they show respect to the people who came before them. So he asks the entire crowd to stand up, give Bruno the respect that he deserves, which they do. Matt, I thought this was very similar to the speech Bruno gave in Ring of Honor at Glory by Honor the year before, right down to him talking about how he doesn't enter the ring easily anymore, that he used to be 275 pounds, that ROH sent him a DVD. Like, it was polite and classy, but it was, I would say, 80% same material. And then, of course, you had the Sweeney angle as the new thing to start up the Hero and McGuinness feud. And yet one of my favorite things in wrestling, which I mentioned in the recap, which is we saw this before, I think, with Bill Watts, which is I love in wrestling the retired legend who clearly just wants to get out of the ring as quickly as possible, but the segment isn't over, so they awkwardly stand on the apron. I love that. I have some notes about this, of all things, this segment. But before that, Matt, what'd you think about this?
Well, first of all, whenever somebody says that someone is under the tutelage of someone, I always think of the Zach Galifianakis on Tim and Eric doing the Terry Green acting school for children, and he goes, under the tutelage of Randy Tutelage. So I can't ever hear that word without thinking that. So I hope that instead of Tank Tolan, Hero was under the tutelage of Randy Tutelage. But besides that, you mentioned back when we reviewed Glory by Honor 5 Night 2 that originally there was going to be a angle where Prince Nana interrupted Bruno at Glory by Honor. And they decided, let's just let him have the moment and not sully it with an angle. So this time they were like, you know what? It's not New York anymore. Who gives a shit? It's Detroit. We could have him sully it with an angle. And I don't know. It was pretty classic. Let's use the legend to get a heel group over, and then use that to get a current top babyface over by defending the legend. And it's pretty boilerplate wrestling 101. And I would say it worked out fine, and the crowd was hot for it. And so, I mean, not much to say other than that. It worked out fine, is how I would describe it.
So apparently getting this appearance was an ordeal, Matt, because as I do, I comb through all the old newsletters to get extra little notes and tidbits for these shows. And I think this was in 3 different observers. I might have these quotes in the wrong order, but this might not even been all the quotes, but this played out over a period of weeks. These are the quotes from the Observer about this. Talks are not dead regarding Bruno Sammartino making an appearance at one of the ROH shows in Detroit over WrestleMania weekend, perhaps on the night of the WWE Hall of Fame. At first, Sammartino turned it down, but has since said he's going to think about it. Now, Matt, let's jump to another week of the Observer. Dave wrote, Bruno Sammartino said this week that he is not going to the ROH show in Detroit, saying that the offer given to him was insulting. Now, let's go to another week. The Observer writes, talks are back on regarding Bruno Sammartino coming to one of the Ring of Honor shows in Detroit. The Ring of Honor idea is for him to appear on either March 30th or 31st, which is WrestleMania weekend. The deal wasn't done at press time, but odds were better than ever before of it happening. Matt, I kept reading this in the newsletter. I was like, is this like a public negotiation going on through the newsletters? But
Yeah, I mean,
it did
I
have.
guess it is because I mean, Bruno's saying like the offer was insulting. Well, that just tells ROH, all right, more money. That's it.
So I know Kerry Silkin said, and we'll get to some notes for this he did a whole episode of his Gone But Not Forgotten podcast with Ian Riccoboni, Last Stop Penn Station. He did a whole episode about Bruno Sammartino, who was one of his childhood heroes, and we used that for notes on Bruno's first appearance. I'm going to use it in a minute for this one. But I think in that episode, he talked about how they paid Bruno $4,000 to do the appearance in 2006, but that was like a 3-thing appearance, right? Where he made an appearance on the show, the Ring of Honor show. He also did an autograph sign where I think they charged $25 per item signed that Ring of Honor, got to recoup their money on there. And he recorded a shoot interview with Jim Cornette that they sold. So they got him to do 3 things for the $4,000 and, got 3 chances to recoup their money. On this time, I could see, I have no idea what they offered him this time, but I could see the fact that it's a different market that was not as beloved in, although he did have some history in that market. It's not his first appearance, and first appearances generally mean the most. He's not recording a shoot interview. He's just this time doing, I believe, the autograph signing and the appearance that he probably got offered less. So I could see him going, well, you gave me, I don't want to put actions or words in anyone's mouth, but you could see someone probably saying, well, we're going to offer you something that's not as much as last time. And you may be thinking, well, I kind of got the taste for that sweet 4K now, but, much like all new TV owners. But the Observer wrote about this whole thing. Dave wrote, Bruno Sammartino also did his most physical in-ring angle in around 20 years. He came out on the first night and got a standing ovation. Sammartino wasn't really a big star in Detroit. He worked a few main events there with the Sheik and later on Dick the Bruiser as Bruiser's partner against the Valiants and Blackjacks, but was never a regular stop for him. But the feeling is that most of the crowd came from outside Detroit anyway. ROH usually draws around 300 in Detroit, but they booked big events there because they expected more than 70,000 wrestling fans in town to draw from. But ROH fans are going to be very respectful to Sammartino and gave him a standing ovation. And then we'll finally go to notes from Last Stop Penn Station. These are notes from ROH owner Kerry Silkin on that podcast. He said, he put over what a success it was when they booked Bruno in New York the year before, but he says that booking Bruno in Detroit a year later he calls it vanity. He doesn't really elaborate, but I assume that's just him saying like, it probably wasn't worth it this time, but I just wanted to do it. He points out, just like Dave did in that quote I just read, that Bruno wasn't as big in Detroit as he was in places like New York. He mentions that an hour before the show, he, Larry Sweeney, Nigel, and some other guys I'm forgetting, then that I think he even said he's leaving some guys out, were like all around Bruno, just, bugging him for stories about wrestling. They just wanted to learn, like, tell us about this. And he noticed that Bruno would not break kayfabe, even to, just wouldn't do it. And Kerry also says that Bruno did not want to do the physical angle with Sweeney. Sweeney really wanted to do it, but Bruno thought he was too old to be laying someone out. Kerry doesn't give any details on how they talked him into it, but clearly they did because it happens. You probably don't have any knowledge of this, Matt, because I certainly don't. But I wonder, Dave wrote in the Observer that was Bruno's first physical thing in 20 years in the ring. He's 71. He dies, in his 80s. I wonder if that's the last physical, if that'd be an interesting trivia thing. If so, if the last physical thing he ever did in a wrestling ring was punching Larry Sweeney in a Ring of Honor show.
Yeah, I mean, there's really you'd have to do a lot more research, I think, probably to figure that out for sure. Seems true.
Especially considering he was only getting older, and clearly, according to this, he did not even really want to do this.
Yeah, I mean, how many wrestling appearances did he make? Period. After, he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. He made other appearances at the Hall of Fame. I think he inducted Larry Zbyszko into the Hall of Fame a couple years after that. But as far as showing up in the ring, I don't know. I mean, where else could he have done it? On some random indie in New York, or Pittsburgh, or I guess maybe. I guess Pittsburgh it would have been. That's where he lived. But I don't know. All I can do is give my best guess, which is yes, but I can't say for sure.
So through the years at gmail.com, write in if you can confirm that Bruno actually did a physical angle in wrestling after this. I'd honestly be a little curious just to know, because again, I think that'd be like a good wrestling Trivial Pursuit question, like a really tough one, but it'd be a good one. If that's the case, if this was the last physical thing he ever did in the ring. But We then find Christopher Daniels fully in his beard and weird face paint TNA era backstage. He says, if you look at his face right now, you can see he's gone through some changes, but he's still the same man we've always known. And in the 5 years he and Homicide have been in Ring of Honor, a lot has changed. But they're still two of the most successful men to step in an ROH ring. They're billing their match tonight as the Battle of the Icons, which, how dare you? They already did that.
Yeah, seriously, they named a DVD that like 2 months earlier.
So Daniels says a year ago in this same building, he pinned the icon of Ring of Honor, so Samoa Joe, and tonight he's going to do the same with Homicide. He will prove he's still the benchmark of success in Ring of Honor tonight. So, yeah, we're getting to the end of the
Daniels is always a solid, reliable promo. This was simple and fine, and I guess good for what it was.
Yeah.
No one's excited, I think, at this point for Daniels versus Homicide in ROH, but he did as well as he could have.
Yeah, they tried to put something on here, but next we have the Anything Goes mixed tag team match. Jimmy Jacobs and Lacey defeated BJ Whitmer and Daisy Hayes in 9 minutes 48 seconds when Lacey pinned Hayes after hitting an implant DDT. Matt, this is it. This is the final Jimmy Jacobs versus either Whitmer or Cabana or both of them tag match of this feud. It feels like we've seen a million of them. The Whitmer-Jacobs feud is ending tomorrow on the next show. So I've enjoyed some of them, particularly at the start, but as we talked before, I think we both agree this is one of those ROH feuds where they draw it out just a little too long before the big blow-off match at the end, and we've seen so many of these padding the feud tag matches. This was the last one. How did you celebrate? What'd you think of this match?
Well, that's exactly what I thought of it. It's like it felt like a real excessive, gratuitous padding of the feud. You know, they tried, they did what they could. But I mean, we'll get to the Jacobs promo at the end of the DVD. I feel like if Jacobs had just done that promo in front of the crowd, that would have better served to build up the match the next night than doing this again. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
keep them away from each other at least like a little. You know, they really never even tried that. They were always like, they're going to fight on every single show until they get to this cage match. They could do one show where they don't fight and just have a good promo, and people will be excited to come the next night to see them fight. As it was, this, again, the energy was high and the finish was spectacular. I'll talk about that in a second, although it does, of course, check off the violence against women quota that ROH has been ticking off since 2002. But I think the presentation hurt this match more than anything, because there was just the picture-in-picture little box that made everything less focused and more distracted, and it was basically on the screen the whole time. Usually the women were in the little box, but sometimes once the women get in the ring, the men were in the little box. They were doing some moves. They pulled out the spike early, and they do the whole spike lodged in the turnbuckle gimmick with Whitmer as he tries to spike Jacobs. There's a spot when the women are in the ring where Prazak, it's not a spot, but it's something that I thought was funny. Prazak says that it's all coming to a head street fight style, but he says it in like a jazzy way. He's like, it's all coming to a head street fight style. And I thought that was just very funny coming out of Dave Prazak's mouth. I'd say mostly it was Jacobs and Whitmer playing the hits. In the crowd, he like jumps off a chair, doing an elbow drop. The spotlight, while they were brawling in the crowd, wasn't completely effective. In the ring, Lacey is using a belt a lot on Daisy Hayes. She hangs her in a tree of woe and chokes her with the belt. And while that's going on, Jacobs jumps off the bleachers with a Rana onto Whitmer. So again, they're working hard the whole time. Finally, we drop the annoying picture-in-picture, and we're back in the ring where Lacey is putting Hayes on the top rope and hitting a twisting neck breaker. And eventually, we get to a point where everybody's brawling with each other, and they tease that big top rope powerbomb into the crowd like the one that they did in New York, which is different than what happened in Detroit the year earlier. But instead of that, Lacey crotches Whitmer, and then at that point, Lacey holds up Daisy Hayes. So Jacobs could literally spear her out of her shoes. Like her shoes go flying off very dramatically. It's a crazy visual, actually. And that allows Lacey to hit the implant DDT for the win. So, like I said, spectacular finish with the shoes flying off. I don't know. I mean, I guess that must have been by design, but I don't know how they ensure that they did that in such a dramatic way, but they really did. But other than that, it's like, this was, I mean, it wasn't bad, but like, who needed it at this point? Like, just do a promo. That's how I felt.
Yeah, this is a weird match for me to review because I feel like it's the rare time on the podcast where the rating of how good the match might actually be and my enjoyment of it are very different because I felt the same like you. Like watching it, it's a perfectly decent version of a match they've done a bunch. In fact, like some elements of it almost feel like a greatest hits of what we've seen from these guys in matches because we get the Jimmy runs on some chairs and does a little elbow drop on the floor spot that he just did on the previous show in the UK. We get, I believe that Daisy Hayes gets speared out of her shoe spot, which I agree was incredible. I think we've seen that once before in Ring of Honor, which again is an amazing visual, and I don't know why more people don't do it. Like Daisy does it incredibly well. She's able to, you really watch her, if you watch her on this, she throws her feet way far so that both her shoes fly like way behind her into the crowd. Like they don't just come off her feet, they go into the audience. And it's just one of those spots where I feel like it's always going to get a crazy crowd reaction. You're taking no more extra punishment than a regular spear, and all it costs you is a pair of shoes. Like I don't know why people don't steal this. It is such a cool looking visual that just immediately gets people to go nuts. But anyway, the problem with this match is like what you said, I would say, Matt, which is most of this match is the women wrestling in the ring while Whitmer and Jacobs brawl in the crowd and pitcher. And the first problem in some ways is not a problem, is that there are actually more than a couple points in this match where something interesting is happening in both matches at the same time, which in a way is refreshing for ROH because I feel like we've seen multiple matches where they've done pitcher and nothing has happened in one of the two screens to the point where you're like, why are you even doing pitcher? Because one of these views these people aren't doing much of anything. But when it is, there are moments in this match where both camera shots are something interesting, it makes it harder to follow the action. And that is, like you mentioned, heavily compounded by the real problem, which is the Whitmer-Jacobs crowd brawl often is taking place on a small pitcher box that is taking, I would say, less than a quarter of the screen. And at times, I would say it's borderline unwatchable. Like, the crowd brawl has the problems that a lot of crowd brawls on the indies have where the action at times is too dark to see it. Other times the lighting hits a certain way and it's blown out and too bright to see. The cameras don't catch every spot because they're trying to keep up with them in the crowd. And all this is a problem when you're just watching a camera brawl full screen. When you're watching on a tiny screen in the corner, a tiny box in the corner of the screen while trying to keep track of things happening in essentially a second match at the same time, this was like, I felt like this was not a fun experience. Like, I don't think this match was bad. It was not fun for me to watch. It felt like a struggle for me to keep up. Like, it felt like homework in a bad way, as opposed to all the good homework. But there were other issues too. Like, I hate that there's this moment where Lacey is really dramatically choking Daisy on the ropes with one of the ringside handheld cams. It's right in Daisy's face. It looks like it's getting a great shot. And we never see the shot because, as usual, ROH does not fully use their handheld cams. And so instead, we get to see the hard cam view of the cameraman likely getting a great shot that we will never, ever see in our lifetimes. We also have the problem that matches like this sometimes have where, like, a big spot in one of the brawls kind of steps on a big spot in the other. Like Daisy does this really cool tornado Daisy cutter stunner out of the corner, but because Jimmy and BJ had just done a big spot in the crowd seconds earlier, and because it appears at that moment they were using audio from the handheld cam in the crowd with it, rather than the camera in the ring, you get no crowd reaction to this big spot from the women in the ring, and it seems like people are distracted. It's just a huge trade-off where in these brawling all over the building tags where if there's too much going on at once, you kind of waste some of it. You don't get full value from it. So overall, this was probably like objectively another decent little above average, little chaotic brawling tag. But the fact that we've seen this so often before, we've seen some of the best spots in this match before, and it was so fucking difficult to watch, I can't give this more than like a flat average at best, a frustrated average at that, Matt, for my viewing experience.
Yeah, in the end, they wanted to give people their money's worth, but I think they should have just gone with some promos. That's really what I think it should have been.
So immediately after the match, Lacey grabs the mic and tells Jimmy she knows she's been really hard on him, but tonight he really made her proud. Lacey says it's time to give him a reward for all his hard work. The crowd chants, "Show your tits," to which an angry Jacobs raises his shirt to show his own tits. Lacey then announces that she'd like to give Jimmy a hug. Jimmy is happy with this, including raising his eyebrows, which I do like the idea that Jimmy is so desperate that like he thinks this is like the craziest, hottest thing. Like he's really he's probably like, I'm getting a hug right now. And to be fair, it's a pretty risque hug because she actually wraps a leg around him and grabs his hair while she hugs him. So that's like that's like a hug plus extra, I would call it.
Yeah, although to show the misogyny of the Ring of Honor crowds in 2007, a mere hug with a leg wrapped around gets a quote dirty whore chant at Lacey.
Yeah.
So and she's just like, it was just a hug, and it's like, yeah, it was. Like, first of all, it's a horrible chant no matter what, but like, it's just crazy. Like, I mean, I know that misogyny is all the rage again in Washington D.C., but like, I know I'm being very political. Listen, I'm not going to stop, but yeah. It's just, I feel like wrestling crowds, at least, are not like this anymore. At least not like to this degree.
Lacey says if Jimmy puts BJ out tomorrow night in that cage, there will be a whole lot more to come. I would have loved at this point if Jimmy just shouted 2 hugs, but sadly he does not. At this point, BJ runs in the ring. He chases them away with a barbed wire wrapped baseball bat that he did not use in the match, which is kind of like an interesting thing where you have this wild anything goes match and he has this big extreme against weapon that you don't see once that now he decides, well, now is a good time for the barbed wire wrapped baseball bat. But yeah, this is just we're continuing. I mean, again, even this beat, it feels like we've seen this beat a couple times in the feud now of Lacey tells Jimmy that she's starting to warm up to him, that she's starting to become proud of him, that, I'm going to give you something if you wink, if you do this. I feel like even this beat of the feud, we have now repeated once or twice, but, we then cut to Jack Evans backstage wearing a suit jacket, which is, I gotta say, Matt, really throwing me off here. But Jack says, we all know who this is, and if we don't, then we have a problem. Jack says he's the future. He says he's all GQ'd up with the camera pans down to reveal it's a Dragon Gate blazer, and also Jack is rocking the bling, which Jack actually says that he's rocking the bling, adding, quote, as they say on the streets, unquote. So, Jack Evans continuing his gimmick as maybe the whitest human being on planet Earth. Jack says he's blinged up because it's a big weekend for ROH, but an even bigger weekend for him because Roderick Strong has admitted he was the one who attacked Jack backstage a few shows ago. Jack says he and Roddy were friends. They were the first gaijin to go to Dragon Gate together. They used to do everything together. Jack says he doesn't know what it is, if it's jealousy or why Roddy did this to him. Jack says he's done so many crazy things in his career when he was just fooling around, but now Roderick has really pissed him off. It was funny here to see Jack do a promo about being betrayed by Roddy when not very long ago we saw a show where Jack did a promo where he explicitly said he didn't care who attacked him, which at the time still stood out as a really strange and bad choice. It feels like they're just kind of
retcon. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just like, because obviously that makes no sense to say. So they're just like, I mean, it's just the funny part. It's like, it makes sense that sometimes you might say something dumb in a promo that kind of is counterproductive to what you're going for, but it's funny that ROH just never edits that stuff out.
It doesn't just say take 2. It's a take promo.
Yeah, exactly.
But don't say that this feud that we just started for you is something you don't care about, but they kind of haven't. That brings us to, sadly, in many ways, the most noteworthy part of the match of the show. For the ROH World Tag Team titles, the Briscoes, Jay and Mark, defeated Naruki Doi and Shingo in 16 minutes, 44 seconds when Jay pinned Shingo after hitting a Jay driller. They won back the tag titles that Shingo and Doi beat them for in that shocking upset 2 shows ago. People might say, why am I saying that's sadly the most talked about? This the Briscoes winning the tag titles back. That should be a happy thing. Well, this match has 2 stories. The one that was intended and the one that actually happened. So this was supposed to be the Briscoes getting their tag titles back after that shocking loss. And in one sense it is that does happen. But instead, I would say it becomes one of the most uncomfortable things we've seen in the history of this podcast. And this is 140 episodes. We've seen a few uncomfortable things. We've seen a couple horrors, Matt. Horrors. I want to make clear that I pronounce it. I'm not one of the people in the crowd for this show. But it's kind of crazy how in the previous few months of ROH, they've had at least 3 serious concussions we've seen, like really serious ones. Like, I don't mean a wrestler gets woozy but keeps on going, which is serious in its own right. I'm talking about we've seen 3 times a wrestler completely get knocked the fuck out cold in a match. Like,
all right, so let me just see if I remember. Right, okay, so Daisy Hayes. Oh no, Mercedes Martinez, right? And then Delirious, right?
Yeah. You brought up. I didn't even realize. I don't know if she was knocked out cold, but Daisy Hayes had that concussion with the giant goose egg on her head too. Like, I completely forgot.
Right.
So yeah, this has been head trauma season for through the years in Ring of Honor. But yeah, we got the Mercedes Martinez in a tag where, and then we had Delirious knocked out cold in the Roderick Strong match we saw recently. In some ways, I'd say this is the worst of the 3. And in some ways, I'd say it's the best of the 3 from like a serious, like, I'll explain this. So the way you could argue—
It sounds bad, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, like the way you could argue it is it's the best of the 3 in that it's the only one of the 3 matches where the person that gets hurt doesn't continue to be involved in the match. Like in the Mercedes Martinez tag, she gets knocked out and people are covering her. They're like, I think there's a flying move that breaks up the pin, so she's getting like taking weight on her while she's out cold, and then there's a flying splash on her to end the match. So she's out cold and she is still being subject to like a couple more moves afterwards. Now, to be fair, I think people might have initially in the first moment for the first spot not realized she was out cold, that she wasn't just selling. But the point is she was still in some way physically involved after being knocked out. Same in the Delirious Roddy match, right? Where Delirious is knocked out cold to the point where we can hear him snoring in the ring and he doesn't get his shoulder up for a pin, a kick out, but they just keep the match going. And he recovers just enough to be able to take some bumps while looking pretty unsteady. And they have him do like the big, Gibson driver on the barricade bumps. And again, pretty irresponsible. So like in this match, about 6 minutes in, Mark Briscoe does a shooting star press from the top turnbuckle to the floor. That's a spot. If you watched a bunch of Ring of Honor, a bunch of Mark Briscoe, he's done that move a bunch of times. Basically, you want to rotate. So basically, almost different than like a shooting star press in the ring. I find wrestlers, when they do it to the floor, they want to rotate basically so that they're landing feet first and their arms are just kind of grazing and hitting their opponent so that they can land on their feet safely. But at the very least, what you want to do is you want to rotate at least up so you land stomach first on your opponent, and then they can break your fall as you crash to the floor. That neither of those happen here. In this match, Mark under rotates, which results in him in his back hitting Doi's body at speed and his head pointing straight down, and he basically bounces off Doi's body and lands head first from the top turnbuckle on the floor. And I think if his body had not hit Doi's body on the way down to at least break the fall a little bit, there's a chance that Mark Briscoe might have died. And I don't say that lightly. There's a lot of moves that I think are dangerous, but I don't necessarily think they might have. I think so. He could have died. So while you can argue this match is worse than the other 2, and by worse I mean more unsettling, is that it just keeps going and going after this. Like immediately after the spot happens, the referee, Todd Sinclair, he is running out of the ring to check on Mark, and very quickly a lot of other people are checking on him too, like students, other refs. Gabe Sapolsky comes out very quickly, then medics. In fact, if anything, I'd argue too many people came out eventually, because there was a giant crowd around Mark at one point with the medics trying to work on him, attend on him, and BJ Whitmer comes out. At this point, I'm sure BJ was a concerned member of the roster, but at some point when the medics are out there, maybe give them some room to breathe. Like there was a big crowd around the man at this point. And Jay, meanwhile, is in the ring. He ends up working almost 10 more minutes against Doi and Shingo, 1-on-2. 10 more minutes while his brother's being attended to by medics and a crowd of concerned coworkers. Mark isn't moved. Like he isn't moved before the match is over. Mark is out there for he is still being attended to after this match is over 10 more minutes later. That's how serious this is. Jay just keeps going. You can tell he's stealing glances at Mark on the floor whenever possible. So he's clearly concerned. He's clearly also now calling a lot of moves on the fly, because obviously everything's been thrown out now from the match. I'm sure all their plans. And at some point during this match, Matt, on the DVD, it gets more surreal because Gabe, in his Jimmy Bauer persona, joins commentary for a minute to update us on Mark's condition. He tells us Mark has full movement in his fingers and feet, but there's a lot of blood. His head is split open. His eyes are glazed over, and Mark doesn't know where he is. He thought he was in Chicago, and they're in Detroit. Gabe says Mark has a concussion, hopefully not a major one. And I would say if you don't know what city you're in, I would call that a major concussion. Like, I don't think you need to do it.
It's also weird to have that on that bit of commentary when you know this is recorded after the fact. Like, so Gabe has a much better idea of how serious Mark's concussion was. Although, we could talk about, concussions weren't thought of as seriously. I mean, when we get to Becky Bayless's update later in the show, we could talk about how different concussions are treated now versus how they were treated in pre-Benoit 2007. But I do think it's good that he came on commentary just to, like, as you're watching this, to know, like, okay, Mark's not dead. You know what I mean? Watching this, he's not paralyzed. So, like, it doesn't come across as so callous that they're finishing the match, right? Like,
I will say, then Gabe tells us that the most shocking part is when Jay went to check on Mark told him to go win the tag titles. Which, you know what? I think he probably did say that.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. He's like, I'm sure he was like, go finish the match. Yeah, I mean, because there was clearly a moment where Jay went back in the ring and got really aggressive, right? Yeah. And, like, obviously he's had to be very concerned for Mark in real life. So it must have been something about Mark that made him say, like, okay, this isn't going to be catastrophic, so I can go do this match. You know what I mean?
No, you're right. I noticed that too. Like, clearly early on, Jay is super concerned in looking outside. But yeah, there is a moment where he goes outside and checks on Mark. And like, I noticed, like you, when he comes back in, he's really full. He really gets right back to the wrestling and like with a lot of energy. So clearly there was something about that made him decide, like, okay, I can do this. So yeah, I noticed that too. Absolutely, that's a great point. So I will say this, Matt, to wrap up this. I'm aware. I thought the commentary was a bit weird. Like, I'm aware this commentary is being recorded days and days later when they knew Mark was going to be okay in the end, and this DVD is being watched by people weeks after the match who all likely know that Mark is okay. And especially even if you didn't know that, I think you would probably assume that if Mark had like died or been paralyzed, they were not going to sell the DVD with the footage of that happening to him. But I just thought this is just a fucking bummer. Like, I'm not even going to express moral outrage here. This episode has done that enough. Because for bigger issues, but because, like I said, this match is actually safer than a lot of the injuries where someone suffers an injury, because we've seen so many matches, not just in Ring of Honor, in wrestling, where the person takes an injury and keeps gutting through it. This is a match where a guy gets injured and they don't take a single. That's the right thing, right? He doesn't do a single bump after that. He is out. But this becomes a match where for 10 minutes, you're saying three people do very on the fly, what are we going to do now? Wrestling, as one of those guys keeps trying to steal glances to see if his brother is going to be all right, as he's tended to by medics in front of a crowd that I would say is occasionally popping for a spot, and they do pop for the finish, but they're clearly also concerned, clearly paying more attention to Mark and are more concerned about Mark, and they're probably giving this match 20% of the reaction it would get otherwise. And I just thought there's no joy in this. Like, what this reminds me of, and granted, this is a far more serious situation in the end result, what I'm about to mention, but this reminded me of like when Owen Hart died in the ring and the WWE kept the pay-per-view going, where one of their big arguments for doing so was if the pay-per-view had ended early and we told the fans what happened, they would have rioted. And I would say, like, yes, this match we're talking about here, it's 8 years later in front of a different audience. But when you watch it, I think this match kind of gives you a pretty good argument that they wouldn't have. Because this crowd, when they react to things in the match after Mark's injury, I would say it feels more polite and supportive than them being viscerally into it. And there's one Briscoe's chant after the injury that, again, it feels more supportive than we're really into this. But their intention and concern is more on Mark. And so my feeling is, watching this match, like, I think everyone involved would have been happier if Jay just won after the injury immediately with like a small package, or just immediately went to the finish and had him hit the Jay Driller rather than extend this for 10 more minutes, because there's little to no doubt in my mind that these fans and today's fans in general don't have that bloodthirsty, the show must go on mindset anymore, right? Like, this isn't 1995 ECW. Fans see these guys as real people. They know they can get hurt. They're concerned when they know they're really hurt. And I think they're understanding enough that they're not like, well, That match only went 6 minutes. Well, what a ripoff! Fuck Mark Briscoe.
I
And so
honestly, I honestly don't even think you need to talk this through. Obviously, nobody would have been mad if they just went to the finish, right? Like, it's not even something you have to analyze. Like, it's like no shit. Like, nobody would have.
Well,
nobody,
again, that is something
nobody would have said they were ripped off. Nobody.
I would just say, though, I just pointing this up because that is something why I referenced the Owen Hart thing. In our lifetimes, there were people that had that mindset, right?
Well, I see,
you have to do this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think it's more just a case of not thinking straight. And I always said that with the case of WWF and Over the Edge '99, yeah, they wouldn't have rioted either. They would have gone home sad. And I'm sure what Vince's real concern would be is that if we told them this, they would have associated this event with a bummer and they wouldn't come back the next time we were there. Right?
Or if we cut the pay-per-view off halfway through, do we have to give refunds?
Yeah, exactly. There was no concern that the fans would have rioted in 1999. Give me a fucking break. I actually think people would be a lot more forgiving to WWF at that point if Vince had just said in the weeks after, we weren't thinking straight, we didn't know what to do, this is just what we do, we panicked, we kept going, in hindsight we should have ended the show, right? Instead of doubling down and defending, because that's understandable, right? This you don't get you'd be okay, yeah, you made the bad decision, you admitted it, I understand, right? I think most people, right, they wouldn't be understandable to obviously all the details we know now about how unsafe Owen Hart's stunt was that night, but the idea that the show kept going, I feel like that is something you can explain, right? If you just admit that you were wrong about it and made a bad decision. In this case, I think that's clearly what happened. Everyone was panicking. These are wrestlers. This is what they do. Gabe was distracted. Kerry was distracted. They were just and they were worried about Mark. And so I think that's a good excuse for why the match kept going. It doesn't mean that I want to watch it or that it wasn't a bummer, like you said, but I think it's understandable that you don't always make the best decision in a stressful moment because there's a bunch of human beings there.
Which is why I think when guys get hurt, there should be set policies established before the matches of if a guy gets hurt to a certain extent, we just stop it or do something, right? Because it is understandably really difficult on the fly if you don't have a set protocol for everyone to go, what the fuck do we do now? Do we keep going? Do we, what?
Yeah, and, I mean, the difficulty in that is you don't always know the extent of an injury, and minor injuries, I'm sure happen all the time, and you can't stop a match every time that happens, right? So, I think, but yeah, I mean, I think if it's clear that someone is knocked out, the match is over, right? That's just, and if you need to do a title change and it's a tag team match and it can be done, go right to the finish. Sure. I
have to express, they did almost 10 more minutes.
With Mark, keep in mind, Mark was lying there the whole time. I think the thing that was even more uncomfortable to me was the fact that Mark was still lying there while they did that whole post-match angle. That was the part that was even creepier to me, especially given some of the what happened in the angle. It's just crazy, that, the crowd, is supposed to be watching what's going on in the ring while this guy is knocked silly being tended to by medics on the floor right in front of them the entire time. God, that's
and we'll get to in a minute how serious this was.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. I'll just say that's a big reason why I can't even give this match a rate. The first 6 minutes felt like they were laying the foundation for another great match like their first one. Doy and Shingle were hitting some cool double teams, but everything after the injury, it was technically wrestling, but it didn't feel like wrestling to me. Everyone was distracted, from the people on the floor to the fans to the wrestlers in the ring, rightfully so. And it just wasn't fun. It was really uncomfortable watching a guy try to work 10 more minutes off a pro wrestling match while also trying to figure out and cope with the fact that his brother just almost died and is in a pretty scary situation tended to by medics on the floor. It feels like no one was having fun, from the fans to the wrestlers. Everyone was just doing what they felt they had to do. Well, what was expected, right? Which is, we're wrestlers. Fans want a match, but I feel again, if you had asked the fans and the wrestlers, what do you really want to do right now? Do you want to see 10 more minutes? Do you want to work 10 more minutes? Or do you just want to stop this? I think everyone would have said, let's just stop this on both sides. But I think everyone instead, I kind of felt like the wrestlers are wrestling because they feel like the fans want it, and the fans are kind of half-heartedly cheering because they feel like the wrestlers then deserve it, right? But I didn't feel like anyone's heart was in it. is how
Right.
I would
No,
put it.
for sure. And it is an impossible match to rate. I'm sure they would have had a great match, but this is what happened instead. So yeah, I mean, I'm not no point in talking about match quality or anything like that.
So, do you have any other thoughts about the match, or we can get to because there's a bunch of pretty
Yeah,
frightening stuff about.
no. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get to this because a lot of people. This was again one of the big talking points coming out of the show. Probably the scariest in some ways injury we've seen on through the years in Ring of Honor history. Then up to this point. So first we'll go to the Observer. Dave wrote. In a match where the tag titles were scheduled to change hands, with the Briscoes winning them from Naruki Doi and Shingo, since Doi had no future booking scheduled in Ring of Honor after the next night, Mark ran up the ropes to do a shooting star press on Doi, who was on the floor. It was described as very similar to Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania, where he didn't get all the way over. Lesnar came from the top rope, landing on his head on the mat. This was worse, as it was on top rope landing head first on the floor. The immediate reaction was shock and horror from people who feared he broke his neck. They went another 10 minutes with Jay trying to keep the match together while they loaded Mark up on a stretcher. Jay pinned Doi with the Jay Driller. Actually, he pinned Shingo to take the titles. Mark spent 3 nights in the hospital and wasn't released until Monday. He had a bad concussion and was in intensive care as late as Sunday night. He had a seizure and was so messed up in the hospital that when he'd revive, he'd go violent, which is actually similar to Lesnar, who was like a wounded animal that night backstage. Mark called the office on Tuesday and said he largely felt fine and would wrestle on April 13th, which is the next Ring of Honor show in Lake Grove, New York. The feeling is they'll make a decision on him later, but do expect him back in the ring by the end of the month. He was really lucky. I'll first off say before I get to the other notes, Ring of Honor, in good sense, they do not let him wrestle on the next 2 shows. He appears on those shows, but he does not wrestle. They keep him off. I believe he's off 3 or 4 weeks. He works then FIP, and then the week later he comes back to ROH. But
so hold on. It depends on what you mean by the next 2 shows. Obviously he's off the he's obviously off the next night. He's in the hospital, as we just heard. But the next double shot, he is not on the show in Long Island, but the very next night he does come back. And that's one of the shocking moments where it's oh, we didn't think he was ready, but he comes back in the match as a surprise angle, takes a bunch of bumps. It was really crazy. And we will get to that when we review. Gosh, what was that show called? Fighting Spirit, maybe?
I think so. I'm not sure.
Yeah. But yeah, so yes, he's off the next 2 shows, but he's not off the next 2 shots, I guess I would say, if that makes sense. So it clearly if he was coming back on that Saturday, they would have brought him back on the Friday, except they wanted to do the angle on the Saturday. So I think there was a lot of controversy at the time that he did come back too soon.
Then we go to F4W Online, a rare appearance on Through the Years from Brian Alvarez and company. And Brian wrote, "At first I believe Mark had no movement in his arms or legs, but he slowly got it back. They brought the medical staff out with a backboard, and he was insisting he could continue the match. The fans were silent, and the other 3 wrestlers decided to keep working. Jay was constantly looking over at his brother. He finally went with the Jay Driller, but no one cared, as it took 10 minutes to get Mark out of there, and people were really worried. He was rushed to the hospital, and once he got there, he had a seizure, and it was a scary scene. He was ultimately diagnosed with a major concussion, and they held him until Monday afternoon at around 1:45 p.m. Central Standard Time." That's very exact reporting, Brian Alvarez. But finally, we'll go to, and this is something we don't get a chance, sadly, to do often. I have a post from the ROHWrestling.com forum. That forum was full of commentary. Gabe would post there and give you all sorts of information. But unfortunately, that message board's been lost to time. But occasionally, someone would cross-post an important message on other forums. Some of those forums have lasted the test of time. So this is the last thing we'll have on this, I think, which is
where did you find this this cross-post?
I forget where. I should get credit, but I was just Googling Mark Briscoe concussion, and for some reason it just came up on the Google results after looking for a while. And so this is Gabe on the ROHWrestling.com forum. I believe he posted this the Monday, so after the weekend was over. Gabe wrote, quote, "Since there's so much speculation about Mark Briscoe's injury, I figured I'd post this before I get to writing a newswire later. Here's everything from my perspective for what were some very scary moments. Before I get to my story, the update now is that Mark suffered a concussion and he will be okay. Right now he is questionable for April 13th and 14th, but he will definitely be good to go for the end of the month in St. Paul and Chicago. First, a little background. Mark has been sick basically since the UK trip. He was even in the hospital for a few days due to strep throat, so he was entering the match a little weaker than usual. He went for the shooting star press and didn't rotate all the way around. I was watching the match on the monitor in the back, which gets the hard cam feed. I jumped up as soon as I saw it and headed straight for ringside. I can't tell you what an awful feeling it is making that run to ringside, not knowing what you're going to find. I get there, and Mark is laying on his back with a small puddle of blood around his head. His eyes are glazed over. Mark said his tongue and fingers were tingling. We had some medics there, so Carrie and I immediately ran to them in the back of the building. When I got back to ringside, Mark was able to move everything. I asked him where he was, and he said Chicago. He asked me what he did, and I told him a shooting star press. He then said he could get back in the match. BJ Whitmer was down at ringside at this point and told him to stay there due to the head injury. Mark then asked me again what happened and what's going on. I told him again he did a shooting star press and the match is still going on. He told me again he was ready to get back in the ring. I asked him if he remembered anything for the rest of the match, and he said no. The medics got to him, and while they were putting a neck brace on and getting him on a stretcher, Mark kept insisting he could get back in the ring. While they were getting ready to take Mark out, Jay won the tag title, so I told him he was in good spirits and relaxed. Mark was given a CAT scan and tests, and everything came up as good as possible. They kept him in the hospital just to be safe and for observation. I didn't get an update today, but he is with his family now, and they will drive him home when he's ready to go. So basically, the end result of this really scary accident is that Mark has a concussion and has to take it easy for a couple of weeks. We'll have updates in the newswire on if he can do April 13th and 14th and his current status. Don't worry, he won't rush back, and he will return only if he's 100% cleared and ready.
Well,
how dare you? He won't return if he's not ready.
100% clear just meant something different back then.
Yeah, but I mean that is so. Let's be clear. That is a frightening thing. That is a guy initially, apparently, it sounds like at least in the initial moments, not being able to move extremities, not knowing what city he's in, and having a seizure at the hospital, and having to be at the hospital for multiple days after this. Like that is incredibly serious to my mind.
Yeah, and I know when Meltzer said Mark was very lucky, that sounds ridiculous knowing what he went through, but in a lot of ways he was, right? He came back. He's still wrestling. It's 18 years later. He's he really did okay. But yeah, it could have been the complete end for him right there.
Yeah.
So it's terrifying, and also it's good to know that he was able to make it through.
So in one moment of levity, Matt, did you notice this? I don't know if this has ever happened in ROH before. Did you notice that before the match they do the usual customary shaking of the hands? After Shingo and Doi shake each of the Briscoes' hands, Shingo and Doi shake each other's hands. I thought that was cute.
That's very Kings of Wrestling. They did that too. They would do that too. Kings of Wrestling wouldn't even do the shaking hands. They would taunt that they would tease that they would shake the opponent's hand, and then they would shake each other's hands.
So things get even weird, as Matt alluded to. Things get even weirder after the match because after being handed both tag belts, Jay Briscoe starts to try and leave the ring to check on Mark again, who is still at ringside. Again, it's been 10 minutes. Mark still isn't on the I don't know if he's on the stretcher yet, but he still hasn't left ringside. He is, it is that serious that they've been worried about stabilizing his neck, I presume, all that stuff. So Jay starts to try to leave the ring to check on Mark, and Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin, back then the Murder City Machine Guns, not the Motor City Machine Guns, run in the ring to shoot an angle that was obviously pre-planned. And the crowd does, I would say, give them a very good reaction, including a welcome back chant. But again, it felt like they got a very good crowd reaction when on any other circumstance they would have gotten an amazing one. And I was starting to feel this incredible sympathy that Shelley and Sabin's big moment is now having to be done in these horrible circumstances. And even worse, that after 10 minutes of having to wrestle with his brother on the outside, Jay still can't check on his brother for an extended period of time. He now has to be in the ring to do this angle, which, you can see Shelley is stealing peeks multiple times at Mark at ringside. So clearly even he is concerned, while doing this angle. Anyway, Sabin gets on the mic and he says they're here out of complete and total respect. Chris says this is probably what Jay least expected to happen right now, but Detroit is their backyard. Shelley gets handed the mic and gets a big chant as highlights of Sabin and Shelley and ROH are shown. And when they come back, there's been a clear edit. I will explain in a minute why there was a clear edit, I think. Shelley says he and Sabin don't have a lot in common with the Briscoes. He says Jay has a lot of tattoos. It's a nice collection, which gets some laughs from the crowd. Shelley says what they have in common common is both teams have traveled to Japan, and they are the only Gaijin to win tag team gold over there. Shelley went through his Rolodex and noticed April 28th in Chicago. They don't have a lot going on. So he challenges the Briscoes on that night for the ROH World Tag Team titles. Jay takes the mic and the fans chant, "Man up." Jay says that they're on, and Shelley asks for a handshake, and after some hesitation, Jay gives it, only for Shelley and Sabin to immediately beat Jay down, including Shelley hitting Jay in the head with the mic. We get a "fuck you, Shelley" chant as Alex says, the more things change, the more things stay the same. Jay doesn't even have a partner right now because his idiot brother put his life on the line for these retards. Someone throws something in the ring. Someone goes mad enough to throw something in the ring at this point. Shelley says, "Nice shot, smartass." Shelley says if Jay doesn't find a partner by April 28th, they're going to be the tag champs. Shelley then says they have a flight to catch to Orlando, which predictably gets a big boos. We then get an immediate ad hyping the Briscoes versus Shelley and Sabin for April 28th. So, yeah, Matt.
In some ways, like obviously it's very perverse because this is wrestling, but like Shelley did a very good job of improvising with the new circumstances. I will say that.
Yeah, like it did help. I mean, it did work for the, like, it is kind of amazing to see, like, the emotional ride you go on where Shelley goes in the ring and he is clearly, like, he is checking on Mark a couple times, clearly being concerned, but he clearly also in his head by the end decides, I'm going to use this. You know, when I lay you out, I'm going to say your fucking brother got hurt, you know, and kind of
which is
rile
crazy.
them up.
It's crazy because obviously it was impossible for him to have cleared that with Jay in advance. But I guess he just trusted, you know, Jay is a wrestler, he's a worker, like, and Jay would be okay with it, you know?
So I alluded to there being an edit. We'll go to the Observer for this. Dave wrote, the most notable and telling thing from the weekend at the shows for Ring of Honor is the hatred for TNA. On the first night when Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley made surprise appearances to build up Mark and Jay Briscoe defending against them on April 28th in Chicago, the whole place responded with fire Russo chants. Shelley said, quote, "I hear ya," unquote, which pretty much means he'll be doing more jobs for Shark Boy, says Dave. They were supposed to beat down the Briscoes, but Mark was hurt badly minutes later. So, yeah, if you don't watch this DVD, you don't hear the Fire Russo chant and you don't see the "I hear ya." This is very much reminiscent of when Joe, a bunch of shows ago in late 2006, did that promo where apparently he said, "I tripped over some bad booking on the way to the show, so I can't wrestle tonight." And Ring of Honor edited that out too, probably to try and save Joe some political headaches, which did not work. If you listen to Through the Years, we've talked about that. So, yeah, this is like the second time a wrestler has kind of played into the fans are kind of cheering for, you know, the wrestlers, the TNA wrestlers are kind of shitting on TNA, and we're going to kind of try and save them a bit, but it's a weird thing. So we then go to Rebecca Bayless backstage. She calls the injury to Mark Briscoe one of the scariest moments in Ring of Honor history and tells us that he's being rushed to the hospital, at which point Larry Sweeney interrupts, grabs the mic, and says, "No one cares about Mark Briscoe. This is about Larry Sweeney." Larry says that he cares about Nigel McGuinness trying to humiliate him tonight and his charges, and says Nigel has not seen the end of him tonight. Rebecca says we'll have an update on Mark later on in the show. So now everyone's getting in on this, using Mark real heat, Matt. But that brings us to our next match back from the break. Yamato defeated Pele Primo via pinfall in 2 minutes, 18 seconds with a German suplex. This is a battle of young boys, as I think Yamato had been working for less than a year in Dragon Gate and by this point, and Pele had become, I would say, ROH's most over student at this point. So this is 2 minutes. They try and cram in as much as they could. I'm a big Pele Primo fan, but even in 2 minutes, I think you could see the difference between the Dragon Gate dojo and how the RH school and the ROH school, like between their bodies, the crispness and the weight of their moves. It was entertaining enough for a lot of time, but it was clearly like, oh, one school is clearly more stringent about things than the other.
Right. You wouldn't know from that these were two guys with similar experience, right? Like Yamato was a lot more polished, which is just like, yeah, I mean, like a lot of those Japanese dojos are like kind of like boot camps in a way that American schools aren't. I mean, it's just a cultural difference, right?
Yeah. And Dave wrote in the Observer, Dragon Gate rookie Yamato debuted and pinned Pele Primo. Yamato's been wrestling for less than a year and is green, but the feeling is he's going to be a top star. And that is Yamato's still at the top of the card for Dragon Gate all these years later. So yes, that turned out to be very much true. But Immediately after the match, Larry Sweeney appears with a mic, Brent Albright behind him. Sweeney says tonight has been an abomination, but he's got some scratch, some moolah, some bucks, and he's not going to stand for Nigel McGuinness trying to humiliate him. So he's reached deep into his pockets to hire the hired gun, Brent Albright, to defeat Nigel tonight. Didn't Larry just hire Albright to wrestle Claudio? And they did a big thing before that match where they got into a fight, and Albright said, like, okay, I'll do this tonight, but afterwards I'm going to do things my way. And either way, out comes Nigel. Here we go. Brent Albright defeated Nigel McGuinness via pinfall in 11 minutes, 36 seconds after he hit a half Nelson suplex.
Yeah, and by the way, before you go into it, I have another odd thing about that promo, because he says he paid off Brent Albright to he says defeat Nigel McGuinness. It's like he's paying him to do what he was already scheduled to try to do, right? Isn't ROH paying him to wrestle as well? So it's like, is he a hired gun for ROH too? Like, it just didn't make sense, because he didn't say he wanted him to cripple Nigel. He said he wanted him to defeat him, which is, I mean, if they were going to have a match, that was the whole point anyway.
Yeah. So, what'd you think about Albright and McGuinness here?
I thought this is one of those matches that started out with some good energy, and then pretty quickly Albright did a chinlock, and that slowed things down a lot, because it was a long chinlock, and the person, as I think you alluded to earlier, that was most exerting himself during this portion of the match was Larry Sweeney, because we see him screaming at ringside, and his face is red, like, oh my god, like he looked like Brother Love. Like, was he wearing Brother Love makeup? I guess it's possible, right?
I don't know. I just gotta say, I think I said this for another one of his early ROH appearances, but I can't remember seeing a manager, and we've seen some managers in ROH between Prince Nana and Julie Smokes who really exerted a lot of energy. I don't think I've ever seen a manager who is just putting more kilowatts of human energy out there per second. He is just constantly redlining it out there.
Yeah, I mean, red facing it. Like
yeah.
I mean, I'm not joking. His face looked like Brother Love. Maybe somebody listening could tell me that he was actually wearing some sort of blush or something. I don't know. But, like, that's how he looked. Like, it looked like he just had, like, incredibly high blood pressure here. But besides that, yeah, so the match was slow. Eventually it does pick up again, and you get some good spots, like Nigel going for the Tower of London, but Albright grabbing his eyes so he can't hit it. Albright hitting a crossbody and Nigel rolling through for a 2 count. But then, like, there's a spot. So Albright goes up top. Nigel knocks him off, goes for another Tower of London, but Albright avoids it again and grabs him in the crowbar, which I thought was a cool spot. Nigel makes the bottom ropes. And then they trade strikes again, and Albright ducks the jawbreaker lariat and goes right back into the crowbar. And I thought those two spots were in some ways like the peak of the match. Like, and they could have gone to the finish after that. Like, and instead, they kind of just, like, work for a while longer. Albright works over the arm. There's a point where Sweeney distracts the ref after the Tower of London. Then Albright attacks the leg and hits a swinging neck breaker. And I feel like at that point, it's like when you're doing, like, a swinging neck breaker after your big finisher, I feel like you're downgrading your offense at that point. Like, to the point where it's like, okay, I think you've passed your peak, right? And, like, that somehow in this, Nigel gets his nose busted open. But he goes for the rope straddle lariat. That's when Hero comes out to distract Nigel, which allows Albright to hit the half Nelson suplex to get the pin. So, like, I thought this was like a mixed bag of a match. I had some good sequences, but the pacing was all off. The chinlock slowed things down a lot. The crowbar sequence I thought was good, but I think they either should have ended the match sooner or done the crowbar sequence later. And then, of course, the finish was totally cheap. So overall, I wasn't crazy about this match. I thought it was could have been a lot better.
Yeah, my long, bland Brent Albright nightmare, I think, has just only begun, Matt, because looking ahead at the results, which as I did after this match, he's getting a bit of a mid-card push for quite a while, starting from around here. I would say this match is more of what we've seen of him so far. The man throws a nice suplex, be it a German or half Nelson or belly to belly. I think we see him all here. He does his usual mid-match chin lock, like you noted. And I don't mind mid-match submissions, but so often his don't have like any urgency to make me interested in them. They don't really build. Is just almost like you know what? He might be a shockingly underrated, influential wrestler because he basically invented the Randy Orton chin lock, I think, before Randy Orton.
No, 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 no. I gotta say, no. Orton was doing that as early as 2004, and
Wow.
and I remember it was like kind of a controversial thing. There was, I think, speaking of Wade Keller, there was like a Wade Keller. I forget if it was a write-up of a match or like an article where he talked about Randy Orton's chin lock and talked about like how great of a chin lock it was and like he really cranks on it and does it from interesting angles. And this was in 2004. I don't know if anyone can find this. At least that's how I remember it. So no, Randy Orton had perfected the chin lock already.
Matt, CM Punk has a lot to learn from that chin lock. But so like there's just not much urgency or anything to make me interested when he does that chin lock, which he does in almost every one of his matches so far. And then you mentioned the part which you said was the highlight of the match, and I agree. Like when late in the match he gets the crowbar on, and then he really starts targeting Nigel's arm. Then there's some energy and urgency to it. And I think that's a good example of the difference between attacking a body part that can actually be part of some exciting wrestling and just time killing. I need to pad this match. Let's lay in a headlock for a minute or two.
Well, that's where the term rest hold comes from, right?
Yeah. I really like the table match he had with BJ Whitmer, but other than that, I feel like Albright keeps being, and I keep waiting for my opinion to change because I'm trying to keep an open mind on rewatch, but he continues to be that guy who has the things I think promoters like, but he's missing the things I like because he has size and a very good body, especially for the indies. He carries himself with some of that big jock, legit athlete energy. His fundamentals are they're fine, but I'm never looking forward to a Brent Albright match, even when it's against someone I like. Like I feel how I feel about Albright so far on rewatch the same way I feel like other fans felt about, say, like Chad Collier, who I actually like. I like significantly more than Albright, or even BJ Whitmer. Like I feel like BJ Whitmer in this era, he consistently works hard, and even though I rarely get excited when it's his time to wrestle, I know on the right night in the right setting with the right opponent, he can be capable of something pretty damn fun. He can surprise me. With Albright so far, and granted it hasn't been that long, other than that tables match against BJ Whitmer, he's not really surprised me. I will give him credit for pulling out a nice flying crossbody off the top turnbuckle here. I guess that was a nice little bit of surprise. To me, this was like a slightly above average, perfectly competent match. But for Nigel McGuinness, you want more. Nigel really just was very generic Nigel here. He threw a bunch of lariats. And you mentioned the Jawbreaker lariat. That this is an important night, I guess, for Nigel, because this is the night where on commentary, Dave Prazak informs us that since Nigel broke Jimmy Rave's jaw with his rebound lariat on the last show, Nigel now wants to be known as the Jawbreaker lariat, which seems a little mean. But so this is the official Dave renaming, the rechristening of the rebound lariat to the Jawbreaker lariat. Yeah, and again, I talked about the Sweeney. We both mentioned the Sweeney stuff. The one thing I want to call out is there's a great moment in this match where he's at ringside getting in Nigel's face as Nigel's in a submission crawling to the ropes, and as he's crawling to the ropes, Larry is right there by the ropes going, give up, and he's just screaming. And then Albright pulls Nigel back into the center of the ring, and the camera pans over to Sweeney, and Sweeney gives this incredible over the top goofy yeah as Albright does, and I just burst out laughing. It was amazing. I mean, Larry Sweeney was the best worker in this match. It's not even close. And that brings us to Homicide defeating Christopher Daniels via pinfall in 15 minutes, 1 second using a jackknife cradle. This is a battle between two ROH legends. They had both just recently lost titles in ROH. The battle between two guys in ROH where the company clearly has no idea what to do with them anymore, and they're just playing out the string with them both. The only setup for this match was, I believe, Daniels got beat by Homicide directly in a three-way they were in together a few shows ago. The first thing you notice, I would say, in this match is how incredibly over both these guys are. It's crowd super loud, drowning out their entrance volume reactions for both these guys coming out.
It's funny because they're like the crowd hates TNA, but clearly the people that are on TV are more over, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they feel more like stars, even if they resent the place that's making them feel more like stars in some ways. But neither of these guys had a particularly glamorous exit for ROH on this run, so I started thinking, maybe this would have been a good night for them to leave. Like, they're on a major show in front of a large crowd that really loves them. Two of the biggest names of the company that were both there from day one, wrestling each other. In some ways, I started thinking, this would have been kind of a fitting goodbye for them. But then I watched the match itself, and I was like, well, this match doesn't quite, not that the matches I think that they do leave on quite do this either, but I don't think that it quite lives up to the atmosphere and the setting. These two had a match in ROH all the way back in 2003 at Epic Encounter that was, I don't know if you remember it, Matt, but that match I thought was shockingly not good.
It was bad. It was a bad match.
Like, they did not seem to be on the same page there. They were botching stuff. They just seemed like two wrestlers. I would say this is definitely significantly better than that. But watching, I'm still not convinced these two have very good chemistry together. Like, the most interesting thing to me about this match is Daniels is showcasing, which at first just appears to be like a bit of a new mean streak, but by the middle of the match, I would say it turns out into him outright just healing. He's working with a bit more of an edge at first. He's a slight bit more aggressive. He hits Homicide with a chair on the floor. But then he puts his feet on the ropes for a pin attempt. And then in the match, he teases the best moonsault ever and doesn't do it. He just, tells the crowd, I'm not giving you it. And that allows Dave Priest on the commentary to say, best moonsault never, which I thought was cute. I would say these two put a fair bit of energy into the match. The pace is good. There's just something missing. There's not the weird botches of their first match in the company, but when you see this, something still isn't quite clicking. I could say it's what we saw from Christopher Daniels' 2006 ROH singles matches, that Chris Daniels 206-itis, but it doesn't feel like his disappointing singles matches last year. I don't even know if this one's on him. Like, I think his character work is probably the most interesting part of the match. I also get that these two, to be fair to these two guys, they're coming to this match cold with no issue really going into the match or coming out of it. And they're both in this really weird point in their ROH careers, like I've mentioned, where they're kind of just playing out the string. But the crowd is very hot for both these guys. So in that sense, it does feel like a wasted opportunity. The crowd goes bonkers late when Daniels counters a cop killer into an Angel's Wings, which is the clear highlight of the match. So I'd give this match a really high above average or a really low good, but they didn't botch anything. It is another one of those matches where it's just very forgettable. And for two guys at this level, on this spot, on a show this big, it is disappointing. But I actually looked up at their cage match afterward. They've worked together in the future with TNA in tags and stuff. I don't know if I forget if they had another singles match there, but like cage match doesn't have them working together much. And I was kind of almost wish that they had worked more, because I kind of almost want to see a third and a fourth match from these two, because I want to now just like, do these guys just not have chemistry against each other?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the match was bad enough to say they have no chemistry, if you know what I mean. Like, I think it was a solid match considering, but I think the actual problem with the match wasn't necessarily what they did or didn't do. I think it's that, like, at this point, even though these two guys were popular among the audience, they feel like almost a relic of a bygone era when they're wrestling each other at this point, which is crazy because obviously Homicide was one of the hottest people in ROH during 2006. He just won the title in one of the biggest moments. But you could already see it by that second half of 2006 where it's just like there was something about these two guys. And obviously they're not, like, Homicide especially is not old at this point. Daniels is not old yet. He's still in his 30s. Like, they're not old or washed up or anything like that, and they're still vital in TNA at this point. But ROH, I feel like, had moved past them. I don't know what it is, but like ROH is just a company where it's like you gotta have new, right? Like it's supposed to be young people that are on the come up, and new people pop up, and like that's what Generation Next was, and then this year that's what some of these new factions are supposed to be, and like obviously they're having Dragon Gate as part of the show, which is introducing a new style, and these guys are good athletes and great wrestlers, but it just doesn't feel vital or fresh anymore when they're wrestling each other. So I do think that they did a fine work in this match, and yeah, Daniels definitely was going heel. And did you catch the spot where the crowd, I think they chanted like "You are balding" at him, which doesn't make sense to me because he was not balding, he was bald.
Yeah,
but it sounded like they said "You are balding" because at that point he points to his crotch and he says, "Not right there, I'm not." And I'm just like, are you bragging that you have pubes? Like, I don't what the but like unless I misunderstood what the chant was, that is what it sounded like to me.
Like that's one of those things where it's like To me, that's one of those things you say because you think it's smart, and then like you walk away, and 10 minutes later, you're like beating yourself up for it. Like, why did I say not down here? I'm not Paul.
Yeah, I will give the benefit of the doubt that maybe I misheard the chant, and there was a context was different. It was not about hair, but that's what it sounded like to me. Anyway, I thought the crowd was very into, especially the last few minutes, and that Angel's Wings near fall I thought was great. I even didn't mind the quick jackknife cradle because it's like, all right, he kind of like Daniels had it all in hand, and then he just kind of like fucked up at the end. I like that. But yeah, it just didn't feel like 2007 ROH was asking for this, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's a great point. I think we kind of talked about something similar on the last show, right, with Joe, with Samoa Joe's for a while, where we talked about how he had been there almost 5 years, and we talked about how in the territory days it was common for wrestlers, you kind of had your run and you left, and I think this is another example. It doesn't matter how good and how beloved you are. These guys have been there. I mean, Daniels had some breaks because of the TNA stuff, but 5 years is a hell of a run in most promotions, and it doesn't matter how good you are. Sometimes it's just time for a change, but it is kind of amazing that these guys started the year holding 2 of ROH's 3 belts. Like Daniels was one half of the tag champs. Homicide was the world champ, coming off, the hottest probably angle he had ever been part of. Just that one night at least for all the buildup, which maybe wasn't as good. And we're now 2 months later, and yeah, they both, like you said, feel like relics of a bygone era. And I think you were saying like there were signs of that in 2006, but it's crazy how severe it now feels, right?
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, the crowd's still reacting to them. It's not like they're just like no one wants to see them or anything. It just doesn't feel vital anymore.
Yeah, and of course we're looking at through the example of guys like who have rewatched every match these guys have had in the company. So. Correct. If there's anyone, it's going to be the act is going to be not as fresh to. It's going to be us, right? We're the literal every show people. So, immediately after the match, Adam Pearce and Shane Hagedorn run in and they start to attack Homicide. Soon after, Jim Cornette joins them. Yes, he is back.
Who couldn't be excited about this?
He is spraying Homicide with mace. The crowd chants, "Fuck you, Cornette," as Jim slaps Homicide over and over as Pearce and Hagedorn hold him back. Cornette takes off his belt and prepares to whip Homicide when Homicide fights free, and Cornette immediately falls on his ass in pure terror and begs off. Homicide's about to lay hands on Cornette when Brent Albright runs in. Be still my heart, Matt. Brent Albright involved in 2 new feuds on the same show.
One of which also involves Jim Cornette. I know you were just like having a ball watching this.
Matt, this is like Christmas came 10 months early. But Brent Albright runs in. He hits Homicide with a half Nelson suplex before he puts him in the crowbar arm bar. Cornette gets on the mic and asks if Homicide thought he'd seen the last of him. Did he think Cornette would forget? Soon after, Colt Cabana, Pele Primo, and Delirious run in and chase the heels out of the ring. Although Jim Cornette whips Pele with his belt some on the floor. And I just felt poor Pele is like so the underdog that even when he's running in to help make a save, he takes a beating as they make a successful save. Matt, in my notes, I just wrote, "Dear God in heaven, Matt, why did we need to bring back the most disappointing storyline of 2006? I was just exasperated. I mean, I knew it was coming, but I get that Cornette is a Jornet. I get that Cornette is a beloved manager. He did do some decent stuff in Ring of Honor early on, but how can you not see? I mean, the crowd was excited to see him. Maybe I don't know, man. I'll go to the Observer. You go first.
Well, I was going to ask. I mean, I don't know, like if there was anything planned beyond this weekend, but it could have just been like, it's fuck it. It gives us something to do for the weekend, Like it could have just been as simple as that. Like, he'll show up. Yeah. Something to do for the weekend. No big deal. Maybe. I mean, I hope that's all that they were thinking.
So Dave wrote in The Observer, Jim Cornette made a surprise appearance on both ROH shows to continue his feud with Homicide. He's only going to be booked on a few shows since he's keeping busy with TNA. And then Dave added later on in his Observer, Adam Pearce hit the ring after Homicide, followed by Shane Hagedorn and Cornette, who sprayed Homicide in the face. The fans did vehemently, I always vehemently negative to TNA chants, as well as fire Russo, which again I don't think I heard on the show. I think they edited those off the DVD too. Cornette no-sold the chants. It was noted to me that TNA should heed this reaction from the fan base that they should be popular with as a sign, but nothing like this is ever a sign. But it does show that blaming it on smart marks in Orlando who have seen too much belies that these were fans from all over the Northeast who are the biggest fans around, and they hated TNA. So interesting one that this is all stuff, you wouldn't really know how much TNA hate was on the show if you watched the DVD because it's all edited out. But two, if you're wondering what Dave's kind of talking about there, this was during a period of time where TNA was taping at the Impact Zone in Florida for most of their shows, and the fans there were often the same fans because they got free at Universal Studios, and some of those fans were starting to really chant fire Russo. They were being dissatisfied with the direction of the company, and the argument coming from people within TNA was, well, those fans are not representative of all of TNA's fans. Like, those fans are spoiled. They're like weird fans because they're the fans that are getting in free, that are at every show, that just want to get themselves over. And in some ways, those fans did want to get themselves over. But so what Dave's talking about here is the idea of, well, look, you've got a completely different base of fans in a different section of the country, and they are also, every time they're seeing TNA wrestlers in front of them, chanting fire Russo and shitting on it. So that's what Dave's referring to.
Well, and then this may be another tangent, but I feel like this attitude that TNA had of these are just the smart mark fans, but we're not going for them. We're going for the casual fan, and that's why we need to stick with Russo. And it's like that mindset has still infected wrestling discourse to this day. The only problem is now it's become promoted by popular wrestling podcasters, where it's now dripped down into a section of the quote-unquote smart audience where they take it as a badge of honor that they're not the sort of wrestling fan that likes good matches, as we talked about earlier. And so this idea of fire Russo, no, this is the Russo attitude or the Bischoff attitude or whatever. It's that's the right way to do wrestling because it's appealing to the casual fans who are more valuable than the ones who want to see wrestling matches. It's just, man, discourse, it's so annoying.
Yeah, we're recording this, I believe, either today or yesterday. News came out that Michael Cole did an interview where he said, the reason why Netflix signed us is because we're not wrestling, we're entertainment. We haven't been wrestling for quite some time. And it's because Netflix didn't have any other entertainment.
But what's funny about that is that I didn't even know about that interview. But just a year ago, they made a whole big show about how they're pro wrestling again, right?
Yeah,
that was so. Now it's now they realize oh, I guess the culture has shifted to where now if you say you're wrestling, the fans don't like it. I guess because it's cool to be anti wrestling again. So I guess Vince McMahon wins again. Fuck.
Well, that's the genius of branding things sports entertainment, right? Which is you can lean more heavily on the sports or the entertainment whenever it suits you. Because if you looked at the history of the WWF back when they were the WWF, sometimes they say, oh, we're a sport to get around certain laws or promotion laws or taxes. And then other times when different laws suited them, they'd go, oh, well, we're entertainment. So, it's kind of they get to straddle the line and make either argument whenever it suits them, which is just fantastic, not frustrating at all. But yeah, that absolutely happens. We then get an ad for ROHWrestling.com's merch store. You can even get skull caps, Matt. Do people still call them skull caps because they did in this ad? I don't even know what a skull cap is. Is it something special, or is it just a toque for people that are too ashamed to say toques? And when we merge, you're gonna have to start fucking saying toque. I'm telling you that right now. I won't stand for that.
Well, okay, so I feel the American word might be beanie. Or winter hat, or winter hat, but I do think there is a difference in that a winter hat maybe is a little bit bigger and you maybe fold the edges around, whereas a skull cap is form fitting to your head, even though the fabric is the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel I haven't heard people call them skull caps in quite some time. It feels like this was definitely 2007 was the era of saying skull caps. Get a skull cap to cover your skull, dude. But
that was my catchphrase back then.
That brings us to our semi-main event. Roderick Strong defeats Jack Evans via submission in 21 minutes 46 seconds when he made him tap out to the stronghold. This is the first time these two have had a singles match in ROH, but not in wrestling period. They had previously had a match for FIP the year before, which ROH tried to spotlight by giving it the Joe versus Punk or Joe versus Kobashi treatment by simply calling that entire show Strong versus Evans. These guys will end up wrestling each other 3 more times in ROH this year as part of this feud, and they'll wrestle each other 2 more times the year after this in PWG. So if this is your era, if you want to see these two guys wrestle each other, Matt, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, so I remember getting the Strong vs. Evans FIP DVD because it was so hyped. I don't really remember that match too much, and I didn't really remember this one, honestly. But I thought this was a killer match. Like, I really liked what they did here. I thought they mixed, like, good intensity, which is something you're not always sure you're going to get with Jack Evans. They mixed good intensity with a lot of spots and moves that I don't remember ever seeing before. And, like, that's hard to do. Like, we've watched a lot of wrestling, and they did some really cool spots here. And I thought the match had a story, between the two guys finally, who knew each other so well, finally having their grudge match. First of all, during Evan's entrance, did you notice that he just, like, cuts a big promo that was better than the one that he did in the pre-tape? Where he was just like, this is Strong's retirement match. I'm going to kill him. Like, this is going to be the end. Like, it was like a good promo. Like, he should have actually just done that promo before. But I guess, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, Jack almost always cuts promos to the camera. And yeah, they're usually pretty good. You know what he's almost like? Toni Storm's best promos are at the AEW pay-per-view press conferences. If you ever watch her there, her promos on those conferences are infinitely more funny and, like, better than anything she's, whether you love her or hate her.
Wait, Trevor,
like,
Trevor, you've watched those?
I watch all those goddamn press conferences.
No, I know, I'm joking.
I know. God.
That is the thing you're most famous for now.
Yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, it is it is. You know what's maybe it is it's just there's sometimes people that are more charismatic when, like,
the music's playing, the lights are flashing.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, exactly.
Anyway, sorry. I mean, back to you, Matt. Well, you were talking about the match.
Another funny thing during the entrances, did you notice that they showed a pair of clips during Strong's entrance about, and like, I think they were trying to be poetic. Did you notice this? So the first clip was when Strong and Evans had their first tag team, like 2-on-2 tag team match together at Reborn Completion, and they beat Special K with the Ode to the Bulldogs. They debuted that move there where Evans jumps off somebody who's being held in torture rack position by Strong onto to moonsault onto someone on the mat. So they won that match with that move, I think. Well, they definitely hit it in that match. I don't remember if they won it with it. And then they show a clip of 2 years later at War of the Wire 2, where they do an ode to the Bulldogs against the Briscoes, but Evans misses that one. So is that supposed to be, like, poetic? Like, oh, the things have fallen apart. They hit it at the beginning, but now they're missing it. Did you notice that?
I did not even notice that, but that's an interesting thing. Like, because sometimes I watch Ring of Honor clips like that, like some of the FIP clips where they don't even show the finishes of the matches when they're trying to hype someone up. And I go, this doesn't make sense. But maybe that was the thing, because you would think they would have a bunch of clips to choose from. So, why would you go to 2 specific ones unless you did have some kind of theme, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, for the match, they do a lot of stuff with Strong, stalling and healing, and the crowd gets on him chanting, Roderick. So that's definitely a focal point. And, they do the basic stuff where Evans is frustrating Strong early with agility and finesse. And even at one point, he has Strong against the ropes, and he says, a little taste of his own medicine. And he hits a chop. And the announcers point out it's the first chop of the match, which Leonard is like, I would have lost that bet. So that was kind of funny. Strong hits his first big move after he catches Jack on a handspring over his shoulders and just chucks him to the mat back first. Then they get into more of their usual offense with Strong hitting chops and backbreakers. And there's a spot where Strong gets the surfboard on Evans, Danielson style. He pulls him back all the ways where almost like his head is touching the mat and he's like in Strong's crotch. One of the early spots that I thought was different and cool, there was a spot where Evans swept Strong's leg with a kick from behind to hit the standing moonsault. And I really liked the kick that Evans did to Strong's leg. Like, it seemed more forceful than most leg sweeps. I don't know how to describe it. Like, it just was like a loud, hard kick that seemed more believable. When Strong takes over, he's just like, he bullies Evans around. There's a really cool, unusual spot actually where Strong and Evans are on the apron, and Strong picks Evans up in a scoop slam. And instead of slamming him like on the apron, he just like chucks him to the floor back first. And like, I don't remember ever seeing a spot like that. It seemed really brutal. And I guess, you probably don't see it more often because people don't want to take that bump. But it seemed really, really intense. And I like that a lot. There was also a spot where Strong, he does a fall away slam on Jack on the floor into the ring post back first. I don't remember ever seeing that one before either. Like, I know people like slam people's backs into the ring post a lot, but in the fall away slam position, do you recall seeing that before?
I don't know if he's done that before or not, but like, it's not often. And yeah, it's one of those moves where you watch and you go, how many people would even be willing to take that or be light enough to take that?
Well, that's the story of Jack's life, right? How many people would be willing to take this? Speaking of which, in another new spot, so Strong gets Evans' head. His head is under the bottom rope, facing the apron, and he picks up Jack's legs and twists them and bends them over the middle rope. And then he picks up Evans' head that's under the bottom rope, and he basically has his foot touch his head. I feel very confident this is a spot no one has done before or since, except maybe Jack Evans, and it was insane. Like that, the crowd goes nuts, and that was a fucking insane, bendy sequence right there. So, Strong took the lessons of Bryan Danielson bending Jack Evans around, and he ratcheted that up a notch into grudge match form, and I think it worked really well. There's another spot where Strong does this crazy slingshot suplex where he releases Evans, and Evans flips all the way over and lands on his stomach. Again, another spot that I've never seen before. Evans comes back with another insane move. So I think if you watched Strong and Evans tag matches, you might have remembered the spot where they would put a guy like lying on his stomach, straddling the middle rope across the turnbuckle, and then Strong would get Evans on his shoulders and kind of like flip him off to do a double stomp onto the guy's back. But in this case, Strong gets in that position across the middle rope, and Evans just does it himself. He does a handspring leaping backflip into a double stomp onto Strong's back. Again, fucking insane. And then he immediately follows that with a space flying tiger drop, or Sasuke special, however, which is what Prazak called it. So at that point, they get back in the ring and they start getting toward the finish. Torture rack backbreaker gets a 2 count. Evans hits a flurry of kicks, standing, twisting press. We get a "This is awesome" chant as Evans gets over Strong's shoulders and gets dropped stomach first on the top rope. And then Strong hits a fall-away slam from the middle rope. Evans comes back with a flying knee, but when he leaps again, Strong catches him on his shoulder and drops him back on his face, which I thought was really cool. Evans comes back with what I would describe as a very hard-earned Poison Rana for a 2 count. Like, it didn't go smoothly. Like, it looked like he had to work for it. But I think in some ways that makes it cooler. And then they start trading up roll-ups. Strong gets a schoolboy with the tights held. Evans gets this crazy bridging backslide for 2. We got another "This is awesome" chant. Evans almost hits a moonsault DDT kind of move, almost I would describe it as, for a 2 count. And then Strong goes for a superplex. Evans knocks him off, goes for a 630. Strong moves, hits the sick kick, hits the Gibson driver, goes right into a deep stronghold. Evans immediately taps. So what I liked about that finish was, like, they could have milked it even more, right? They could have had Strong get the stronghold and Evans fights out, right? They could have done some near falls off of the Gibson driver. Evans could have hit the 630 and gotten a 2 count, right? But instead they save all that. But they still had this really intense, exciting finish. And I appreciated that. I would describe this match as a forgotten gem. So many unique spots. It had the intensity I'd want. Strong was clearly positioned as the better man, but I thought that was Evans' best singles match ever in ROH. I'd say actually pretty easily.
So, if you're a longtime listener, you know I'm a big Jack Evans fan, but that doesn't mean I think he's perfect. Like, One of the reasons I love Jack is because he isn't well-rounded, which makes him more interesting to me. He's great at what he's great at, and he's kind of bad at what he's not great at. Like, he takes an amazing beating. He's an exciting high flyer. He has tons of personality. You don't want to see Jack throw a lot of strikes or mat wrestle, even though I have seen him do a little of both, and he's definitely gotten better at those elements by this point. I think for me, I usually don't want to see him even work a 50-50 match. I want to see him work as the underdog, fighting from underneath, taking that big beating, always with a chance to win if he strings together some of his flying moves. I think that kind of plays to his strengths and his persona and stays away from his weaknesses. And in ROH, that's usually the position he's been put in. You know, he hasn't been in a lot of big singles matches, and when he has, he's been dominated, like those Danielson matches. He's perfect for tags where he can be the face in peril, and he's great for multi-mans where he can kind of pick his spots in and out. So to me, this match then, it's Jack in the world of the traditional. This is the semi-main event of a major show, a big one-on-one singles match is part of a feud, and they work it, I would say, much more to the rhythms of a traditional big super indie match of the day. Like, for a lot of this match, it's back and forth with frequent momentum shifts, and Jack is positioned, I would say, as more of an equal to Roddy than you might expect, given if you've watched a lot of Jack and ROH. I would say once we start to get deep in the match, Roddy starts to feel like he gets more of the momentum at points. But this is Jack Evans in a big spot, and he's not just like taking a beating for 18 out of 21 minutes like you might expect. So early on, because of all that, there was a part of me that was a little disappointed seeing this match was going to be closer to how most ROH matches are structured, the big ones at least, rather than being more in Jack's, what I perceive as being in Jack's wheelhouse. And then I stopped caring as much because this might be one of the most highlight reel matches we've seen on this podcast. Like, Matt, you covered it great. You covered most of the great, maybe all of the great spots. There are so many cool, you mentioned just spots we haven't seen before. There's just so many cool eye-catching spots in this match. Like, you could fill a 4 or 5 minute highlight music video with wall-to-wall cool stuff from this 21-minute match. Like, Jack takes
and I'm sure someone will do it soon, since that has been a social media trend, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you do that kind of stuff and you're listening to the show, this match is going to be perfect for you. Like, don't walk to this match. You will get a great music video out of this. So yeah, like the fall away slam into the ring post, chucking him stomach first on a top turnbuckle, that crazy, like you mentioned, the release slingshot suplex where Jack keeps rotating on the bump. But I thought was cool. You saw some really cool, pretty bumps and things like that. But like you mentioned, you also saw some stuff that was like really ugly in a really cool way. Like that, I think one of the cool key spots of this match is the one you mentioned, where in a match with so many crazy spots, just that spot where Roddy is holding Jack standing on the apron like he's going for a slam, and you think he might do something like an apron spot or something, and he just drops him dead drop to the floor and lets him splat there like a bag of trash. And it's just ugly in the best way. Like, there's nothing imaginative. It's surprising that it's so unsurprising. It's like you're not expecting him to do something so simple. I feel like wrestling has gotten so intricate and flashy that sometimes it's almost like a shock to be just, he's just dropped him. He just fucking dropped him. Or that moment where Jack's going for a springboard and Roddy just kicks the top rope and Jack loses balance and just lands flat on his face. There's just spots like that where Roddy just hurts this guy in really ugly ways. Like, you get some pretty stuff and some really ugly stuff, and it all works. You get the submissions you talked about where Jack is, legendarily flexible. I think we're going to have to use that kind of tarantula type move you described where Jack's foot ends up touching his own head. I think that's going to have to be the image for this episode. It is just so insane. And like you mentioned, we've seen Danielson stretch him. This is like setting a new bar. I would say, I'd go as far as to say all this stuff I think actually slightly hurts the finish, because the finish is Jack wipes out on a 630. Roddy gets up, hits the sick kick, that running boot, and then he immediately puts Jack for the stronghold. And like you said, Jack taps out basically immediately. And it's kind of the expected finishing sequence. That's kind of a sequence Roddy ends matches with, and it's a good finishing sequence. But I normally enjoy it. But I think the thing that I don't like here is we just saw Jack get stretched literally in half. And so to see him submit immediately from the stronghold before he even really gets to apply it all the way. I was like, in a way that puts over the stronghold, but in a way it's like, it was kind of almost broke my suspension of disbelief, where it's like, if your head was touching the back of your head and you didn't, you survived it, are you going to tap out immediately before you even get into a really strong Boston Crab? I mean, I'm not sure. But that's a minor nitpick. And the fact that, in a match where we've seen so many amazing things that, as you said, we've never really seen much of or ever before, the fact that it ends with like maybe the 28th through 30th most impressive moves in the match. But again, they are Roddy's signatures. But again, that's a minor quibble. Jack hit some great stuff here too. You mentioned that great handspring double stomp onto Roddy when he's draped on the corner. That's amazing. Jack hits his standing 450, which still seems insane to me over a decade and a half later. The other thing I want to praise is the other ingredient of this match that really makes it pop to me is Roddy's crowd interaction. Like, this crowd has been great all night, but they're having a ton of fun here getting on Roddy's case. And Roddy is interacting with the crowd so well here. It's like night and day compared to any other match he's had in ROH up to this point. Like, Roddy has always been kind of charisma challenged, but I would feel like that's more in his promos than inside the ring. But even there, it hasn't been in his strongest suit, but he definitely shows more charisma in the ring than on promos. But here in this match, he seems so at ease all match, threading in comments to the crowd and reacting to what they're doing without slowing the match to a standstill or getting too distracted or derailing it. He seems so comfortable and in control here. It was kind of shocking to me, because it was like, I've never seen him this at ease and playful like this. And maybe it's because he's starting this new heel run here, but he has just a bunch of fun little moments in that vein. Like, there's this great spot where Roddy has Jack in the corner. And he tells the crowd to shh so they can hear a really loud spot, which is a spot Roddy has done 100 times. And two really cool, unique things happen. First, the crowd doesn't play along. Like, normally the crowd does play along because they really want to hear the loud chop really well. Instead, they actually get louder just to spite him, which I thought was amazing. And then Roddy doesn't chop Jack in the chest. He chops him in the stomach, which you talk about so many things we've never seen before. I can't recall seeing those spots. And then he has these simple moments, like immediately after some big moment in the match, he just emphatically shouts, "He can't beat me," in this way where I was like, fuck, okay, man, like, don't hurt me. Like, it was just very, really intense in a good way. There's a moment where the crowd is razzing Roddy, and he just calmly says something to the effect of, "The more you do that, the more I'll hurt him. So keep it up." Like he's just really comfortable on this night. There's a spot where the crowd's starting to get behind Jack, and Roddy cuts him off or something to that effect, and I can't quite remember. And Roddy then goes, "Well, that ended quick," and then immediately Jack hits him. And I love when heels mouth off and they get hit just as they're mouthing off like that. But I will end by saying my favorite Roddy crowd interaction moment in this match is after hitting a move on Jack on the floor, Roddy goes in the most self-satisfied, smug way, "And that's no remorse." And immediately a fan shouts, "You're not funny." And if Roddy was not so smug, and if that fan's comment was not an immediate response, it would have not have been hilarious to me. But both those things have, and just the timing of it made it hilarious, and how smug Roddy was. And you kind of have to see it in rhythm to enjoy it. And yes, I am overhyping it and ruining it. But so this wasn't the exact match I was hoping for. It's not perfect. I don't know about you, but I think poor Jack was starting to struggle just a little bit by the end. Like, he was clearly fucking exhausted in the final minutes. He was really loudly calling spots. You could tell he was really winded by the end, because he's probably not used to working that many one-on-one matches where he's asked to give this much, right?
Although I didn't really care. Like, I still think this is one of the better matches of the year so far for ROH.
No, but I agree. And also, there's like being winded that it affects you, and there's winded where like where I can tell you're winded, but you're gutting through it. You're still hitting the stuff.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, again, like, is it something that like takes you out of the match? Because it's like
no,
because it's like, I mean, it makes sense for a wrestler to be exhausted near the end of a match, right? Like, even in kayfabe.
So overall, I would say this was a great match, like 4.25 stars, massively fun, full of spots you're not going to see other people do or allowed to be done to them. Jack, to me, is a pure fun worker. I've described him that way before. And to me, this is a pure fun match. It completely killed it on a major spot on a big show. And you called this a hidden gem. And you're right, because it's weird. Like, when I was sent to rewatch it, I hadn't watched this match in years. I love these. I really love Jack, and I love both these guys, and I like their work together. And I was thinking, because I don't really remember this match, it has to have been disappointing, or I would have remembered it. And then I watch it, I'm like, why don't I remember this? This is fucking great. Like I don't get why I don't remember this.
I mean, I think it probably had the misfortune of coming off on a double shot weekend that had, I'd say, at least one of the more memorable matches in ROH history the next night, and possibly a second one, depending on how much you like those Dragon Gate tag team matches. So I think maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Dave Meltzer wrote in The Observer, Roderick Strong beat Jack Evans to keep the FIP title. Evans got tired, so there were some blown spots. Now, maybe they edited stuff because I did have noted they've edited out the TNA crowd comments all night, but I didn't see anything I'd call like a blown spot. I mean, there was, like you mentioned, that reverse Rana where he had to really fight for it, but even that, I don't know if I would call that a blown spot.
No, because again, that's not implausible in kayfabe terms.
Yeah, it wasn't pretty, but he still hit it, so
right.
Yeah, I don't recall that. But again, I guess there's always the possibility they edited something out, but to me, I didn't really see it that way. But we then joined Rebecca Bayless backstage again with an update from the hospital on Mark Briscoe. Rebecca says, well, Mark did lose movement in his fingers for a few minutes. He's now fully mobile, although he was busted wide open and suffered a major concussion, so he's doubtful to wrestle tomorrow, but will be able to do so in the future. So
see, that's the Thor part where it's I don't think anyone would say that minutes after a major concussion now, where someone's rushed to the hospital. Like you wouldn't be able to confidently say the person can wrestle in the future. You could be hopeful but the concussion protocols are such now where people, you've heard about people being out for over a year with a concussion, in a while, wasn't Adam Cole out for at least close to a year? It was, so it's just times have changed in terms of how people think about concussions, but they really jumped to conclusions by saying that he would be all right before this particular show was even over,
And we talk about signs of the times. I think nowadays you wouldn't even have to say if you say someone has suffered a major concussion, you would not have to then tell them they're not going to be wrestling tomorrow. That would go without saying, right?
Right.
If you tell me someone's had a major concussion, they're not going to be allowed to wrestle tomorrow, no matter how they feel. You're going to make them wait at least probably a week.
Exactly.
So that brings us to the main event, an 8-man tag team Dragon Gate rules match. Shima, Dragon Kid, Ryo Saito, and Susumu Yokozuka defeated Austin Aries, Claudio Castagnoli, Delirious, and Rocky Romero in 27:56 when Shima pinned Delirious after the crossfire. So the night before the second ever WrestleMania weekend Dragon Gate 6-man, we get a Dragon Gate versus ROH 8-man. The ROH team, it's kind of this odd collection from a face-heel perspective because Aries and Delirious are clearly faces at this point. Romero's kind of unknown at this time because he had just come back. Claudio is still kind of a heel, although he does tone it down a lot for the purposes of this match. These matches are really hard to stand out for me. These big tag team spot fests. I've seen so many of them. As I've said this before probably, and they all run together as a result. I know the structure. I know the pace. This match is good, very good. In fact, I'm actually right on the border of 3 3/4 and 4 stars. That border of very good to great in my mind. I'm wavering back and forth, but it's also not memorable in the sense where I've seen now in all the years since this match, a million matches of this style, of this quality in my life. I would say, my biggest takeaway watching this match was actually I really wish I could have seen in this era a Claudio versus Dragon Kid singles match because, in fact, if I could have traded seeing this nearly 28-minute tag for a 10-minute Claudio versus Dragon Kid match, I would have done it because Claudio's obviously an amazing base. The crowd loves Dragon Kid, and they really have fun with early, Claudio's taunting Dragon Kid's height. Dragon Kid really impressed me here, not just with his usual signature spots, which are so, obviously eye-catching and fun to watch, but, I thought his bumping was really good here, too. There was a couple spots where he just flew for other guys. Other things that really stood out to me were Delirious really got to inject a lot of his personality into this match, which isn't a given that, you would think, Dragon Gate match, then maybe they would just want to make him tone it down and go straight spot. But Shima clearly likes reacting to him to the point where I was like, why didn't Delirious get more Dragon Gate bookings? But then I looked it up and he actually got to work a few matches in Dragon Gate a few months after this. I like the quadruple big boot spot from the ROH team and I also thought Susumu Yokozuka hit one of the best lariats we've seen on Through the Years. Aries took an awesome bump for it.
Yeah, I think Aries' bump was even better than the lariat itself.
Yeah, it was a great combination. It was probably like an 8 out of 10 lariat and then like a 9 or 10 out of 10 bump for it. It was just, which elevates it all. But this is one of those matches where it's hard to come up with unique thoughts because the match isn't unique, but it's easy to come up with a review for it in the sense of I would say like a recommendation. Like, you know what kind of match this is. This is a pretty good one of those matches, but not in the top tier. So I would just say you will like or dislike this match as much as your appetite for these kind of matches. If you dislike them or only want to see the creme de la creme of them, this isn't the creme de la creme of them. But if you like them and want to watch any match of this style that's like, say, 3.5 stars or better, I think this match clears that bar with a bit of room to spare. And but I will say, and by saying, I wasn't bored or exhausted by this, despite it being almost 28 minutes long. But we just on the last show watched a Briscoes match that went 30 minutes, and I said, I don't think that match would have been better if you shortened it. I do think if you tighten this match to a 23-minute match, if you took 5 minutes out and went even harder with your best stuff for 23, I might have had a little bit more punch to it. But overall, again, hard for me to come up with really unique thoughts on this match. You know what kind of match this is going to be. It's a pretty darn good one of those.
Yeah, I would call it a great match. I mean, not like life-changing or anything, but like I'd say this was pretty easily a 4-star match. Just the intensity of the moves and the level of execution and the entertainment value, I think, put it at least to that level. I think that's fair to say. But yeah, I mean, it does run together with a lot of matches. I think, the wrestlers do what they can to try to make a match stand out and be unique compared to just like another spot fest. And I think, like, okay, so you mentioned Dragon Kid did a really good job, and I agree. And I thought like probably he and Sema were the highlights of their team. I actually was surprised by how much Romero got to do in this match because he's really, been a non-factor in ROH for the past couple years. And he gets in this match, and like I think he adds some fun twists because he does like the twisting armbar off the top rope on Shima. Like he does a lot of other cool like little ankle locks and cradles and kicks, and like I thought that his involvement in the match gave it a little bit of flair that it maybe wouldn't have otherwise had. I thought Claudio was great in the spots that he did, although I actually thought he should have done a little more. I'd say of his team, he's the guy that we saw, I think, the least. I didn't actually like have a stopwatch out, but I think he was involved the least. But, he made his moments count. Like you said, he's basing more than he has previously in ROH. And I think hopefully we're finally getting to the era where Claudio can really start playing to his strengths more often than he had in 2006. I also, I'm trying to think. So, okay, so obviously like Claudio does this great long giant swing on Dragon Kid in this match, as long as any of the ones you see him do, nowadays. And I'm curious, like, I'm trying to think, he really hasn't done a lot of giant swings so far in ROH, right? Like, he's just starting to incorporate that more into his repertoire, right?
Yeah, like did he do one against like Chris? It almost feels like maybe he did a few to start with and then kind of toned it down. Like, didn't he do one early on in like the Chris Jericho feud or something? I'm not sure. I vaguely recall him doing it.
Chris Jericho? Oh no! Oh, you're talking about in AEW.
Yeah. I got mixed up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm talking about like in what we've watched so far in ROH.
Yeah. You're talking about now, then as opposed to now. Yeah, like he hasn't really done it. And did he do it? Yeah, did he do it much as a face? I don't think so. And clearly, he probably wouldn't want to do it as a heel because that's a very crowd pleasing spot.
Right. They did this spot in the Kings of Wrestling versus Briscoes match at Final Battle where Hero put both Briscoes across his shoulders and he spun around. That's a little different than a giant swing. But yeah, it's cool that he's incorporating it. And certainly Dragon Kid is a great person to do it too. Obviously the early part of the match, they try to be a little more traditional. They get the heat on Aries for a while. And then the ROH team gets the heat on Dragon Kid for a while. And then of course you get into the mind-numbing move sequence, which certainly does last a very long time. And, but it's fun. It's always great fun. And they hit every spot the way they wanted to hit it. And like and the crowd goes nuts and they get more and more nuts, and that's what you want, right? So and Delirious got that kick out of the swine before Cena hit the arm capture crossfire bomb on him for the win. And yeah, I mean, it was a great match. Again, like nothing that people would be talking about for years, but definitely a great match. I think like if you were coming knowing this was the main event, you got what you came for here. And I thought it was a good 1-2 punch with a little bit more of a substantial semi-main event between Strong and Evans.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing I want to mention, which was they actually had a Dragon Gate announcer introducing the Dragon Gate team in like the more Japanese style of ring introduction, which I thought was a nice touch too. I thought that was a neat little thing there. So after the match, we get Dragon Gate, and that was awesome chants as the wrestlers all shake hands. Shima tells Delirious, "Thank you very much," in English. Aries has all 8 guys raise each other's hand to get another round of applause. And then we join Jimmy Jacobs backstage. He tells us his favorite movies have always been romantic comedies, the teen ones. They're so predictable, problems always get resolved in the end. Jacobs thought his life was a romantic comedy, but this year, resolution has turned to violence. He talks about how he and BJ Whitmer used to be tight. Before every match behind the curtain, before the music started to play, BJ would give Jimmy a hug and say, "I love you, little brother." But when Jimmy found Lacey, BJ walked out on him. A year ago in Detroit, Whitmer almost killed him. He came 6 inches from his head splattering on the concrete floor. Since then, the violence has only escalated. BJ has taken pints of blood from his body, years off his life, but most of all, he took his innocence. Jimmy says he used to be happy-go-lucky and seize the day, but some days now he doesn't get out of bed. And when he goes to sleep, instead of counting sheep, he counts ways he can hurt BJ. He hopes he can go back to being happy-go-lucky after this ends, but he doesn't think he will. Jimmy says tomorrow night they'll be locked inside a steel cage like zoo animals, like a sideshow freak, like a caged bitch. Which is that a thing? I don't know.
Yeah, that's not a thing.
Yeah. I've heard the other two. Jimmy says tomorrow it won't be over until one of them can't stand up. He won't shake his hand or hug him as a sign of mutual respect after. It's prom night, and it always ends the same. The villain gets what's coming to him, and the hero gets the girl. Jimmy ends by saying, "I love you, big brother," and walking away. So, Bat, before I ask your thoughts, I have a feeling from a comment you made earlier that you really like this. I looked at reviews after I did all my notes, and I saw other people really love this. I was a bit more mixed. This was very overwrought, which I realized might kind of be part of the Jimmy Jacobs persona. There were moments for me that really worked, and there were moments of this promo that I thought were a little overly dramatic, which is saying something because this is a feud that's been going on for over a year. So if I'm saying it's a little too dramatic, like this is a moment that's worthy of quite a bit of drama. But I just thought some of Jimmy's promo was a little extra, but overall, I do like the idea of framing it with the "I love you, big brother" at the end, telling that little bit anecdote. I like the idea, and I think wrestling's missing more of this, that he says in the promo, like, when this is done tomorrow night, I'm not going to shake your hand afterwards. Because how many times have we seen and sometimes there's a place for that in wrestling, but sometimes there's a little too much of that, of like the feud, and then immediately everyone just goes, "Oh, we're friends now. We love each other." I like that he was kind of putting over, this is so serious. Is like, even when tomorrow night ends, we're not going to be friends. Like,
he was probably referencing the Cabana versus Homicide match that happened a year earlier.
Yeah, and I really like that too. But what did you think about this?
I mean, I'm honestly on the same page as you. Like, I thought, like, there was a lot of great stuff in this promo. I especially liked that like you said, the framing device with the big brother, but also the romantic comedy line at the beginning. That I thought the last line was really great. Like, it's prom night, it always ends the same. The villain gets what's coming to him, and the hero gets the girl. "I love you, big brother." That was a great line. I think the whole cage bitch thing, like, was really weird. And I thought, like, the other thing that really took it down was, like, the part where he starts crying. Like, he's just
he didn't have the acting to pull it off.
Yeah, he's just not a good enough actor to do that. Like, don't cry. Like, if he hadn't done that, I thought this would have been a better promo. As it is, I still think it's really good. Like, it's effective. And by Ring of Honor 2007 standards, it probably is a great promo, right? So yeah. He did what he needed to do. And I still think if he had done it in the ring, it would have been better than the match we got.
Like, the thing I'll say about Jimmy Jacobs in this era is he has like an ambition in his promos and his angles and storylines that I think not really maybe no one else in the company and no one's in CM Punk really has had. But I think you see in this promo kind of everything from him, which is sometimes, like we just mentioned, he doesn't quite have the talent to quite match his ambitions, but sometimes he does. I think
he's a good wrestling promo. He's just not an actor.
Yeah.
Like that's all.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of those things where if you're shooting for a 10 and then sometimes you hit a 7, you will notice that. But sometimes when you're shooting for a 10, he does hit a 10. But yeah, so that was the promo. And before we cover what has been a very kind of interesting show, Matt, who wins the Matt F. Trophy for this one? Because this has been quite the show.
Yeah, so for me, it was between Jack Evans and Roderick Strong. And I actually had a pretty hard time deciding which of the two, but I ended up on Roderick Strong. I think that he, as great as Evans was, I think that Strong brought an extra level of creativity. Like you said, his ability to project his personality really shined through in this match. And like his performance was just so rock solid. He just seemed like a great like main event level talent on the show. And like that match was clearly the highlight of the show. And I think that he was the person that held the match together. So I feel like he deserves it. I don't think he's ever won it before. So I think like it's a good pick.
Yeah, I think this was one of his best nights that we've seen so far. Like, just a great performance, well-rounded performance from him. So that brings us to the end of the show. And Matt, I gotta say, usually when I get to the end of the show, it's pretty easy for me to sum up because it's usually pretty much just me saying it's a good show, average show, maybe just watch one or two matches from it, maybe watch the whole thing, all the stuff. I have a lot of different feelings about the show because first off, in some ways, this kind of feels like a Ring of Honor B show, like the Friday night of a double shot, which is what it is, because there's stuff that sets up the next night, like that filler Jimmy Jacobs, BJ Whitmer tag, there's some things that on the undercard feel kind of like the B show stuff, but then that giving you Jack versus Roddy for the first time in ROH, that feels big. The Dragon Gate guys, you don't get to see them often in ROH and like this, that's a big deal. They gave you the big celebrity wrestling appearances, even if they're not as big as maybe you or I would like. We didn't really want to see Jim Cornette back, but they brought him back. Bruno's impact wasn't as big the second time as the first, and he basically redid a lot of stuff, but they did go to the trouble of bringing him in. But so in some ways it feels like a big show with, the 1,200 crowd and all that. And in some ways it feels like a light show. In some ways it feels kind of like the show after WrestleMania, where it feels like there's even though you would think the WrestleMania shows, which are big shows, are kind of like the end of something, and some angles they are, it almost feels like with like the Joe stuff and like the Joe stuff ending the show before and the Rave Nigel feud ending before, there's a lot of new balls in the air on this show. They're starting a new program with Nigel and Heroes and Sweeney. They're trying to reawaken this Cornette thing for one weekend. They're got Brent Albright starting 2 different feuds, so all this weird stuff. But I would say the biggest thing that makes this show confusing for me, Matt, is there are parts of the show I loved, like the Jack Roddy thing is a great match. So the parts where I'm just having a great time, and then there are parts where the vibes are really bad between the Mark Briscoe injury, Jim Cornette coming back to redo the worst angle in Ring of, and we agreed on one of the worst things in 2006 Ring of Honor, and even Brent Albright starting 2 feuds simultaneously. It's like, so it was weird. Like this is a good show, and I would say everyone should go out of their way to see Jack versus Roddy, but like there are definitely parts of the show that were not good. I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mind the Cornette thing as much as you, just because I know how fleeting it's going to be, and just sort of like a gimmick more than just like a direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
As far as like the bigness of the show, I think just worth noting, like the thing that was probably supposed to feel most consequential on the show, which was the tag team title change, was sullied by obviously the Briscoe injury. Like that was supposed to, I think, be a big centerpiece of the show, that match. So that took it down a lot, obviously. But I do think besides that, obviously, which was a huge downer, I do think the show was more enjoyable than the match quality would lead you to believe up and down the show, if that makes sense. Like the crowd was hot, there was energy. Like some of the matches on the undercard were all right. They were mostly very forgettable and blah. I love the last two matches, especially the semi-main event. So I do think it turns out to be a good show. And yeah, it does mainly set up what really should be a pretty epic super card of honor.
Yeah, so that is the show. Plugs through the years at gmail.com. THROH is how you spell through, of course, in our world. At Trevor Dame on Twitter, at Mayor MGF on Twitter. Plug those things into the Blue Sky username convention, whatever. You'll find us. You'll find us if you want to. And yeah, next time on the show, we will be covering the big WrestleMania weekend show, Super Card of Honor 2. This is the end of like a run of 8 big shows, and this is one of the bigger ones. You got a giant triple main event here of BJ Whitmer and Jimmy Jacobs ending a feud that's lasted for literally over a year inside a steel cage. You've got Roderick Strong versus Austin Aries having the first match since they've broken up, for the FIP title. They're giving that to us. And you're getting the second ever in the U.S. Dragon Gate 6-man Can They match, or top what they did the year before, the match that everyone talked about. And plus, you got a whole undercard to boot. Going to be a real...
I've hyped up that steel cage match in my mind for a long time. I haven't watched it in a while. Hopefully it lives up to my memories.
Yeah, so that's going to be a super big fun show to do. And this one was fun too. So until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.